Hi guys. Tonight we set foot on the open plains, where the air feels sharp as broken glass and the wind slices across your cheeks like an invisible knife. Imagine trudging across a snow-dusted prairie, the horizon endless, the sky pressing down heavy and blue-black, and the only shelter for miles is a single cone-shaped tent glowing faintly from a fire within. The temperature plunges so quickly that, if you tried to simply curl up outside under the stars, you probably wouldn't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And since I always wonder where you're listening from, feel free to post your location and the local time in the comments. Now, dim the lights, let your shoulders drop, and let's drift into the story. You step toward that tipi, its poles stark against the night sky, its hide covering creaking as the gusts whip at it. At first glance, it doesn't look like much animal skin wrapped around wooden poles, stitched seams that might let in drafts. And yet, for generations, this fragile-looking cone was a fortress against the bitter cold. You duck beneath the flap, and the world changes instantly. The shriek of the wind softens, replaced by the gentle crackle of a fire in the center, its smoke rising up toward the clever vent at the top. A faint aroma of charred wood mingles with the musky scent of buffalo hide. You sink down on layered furs, and your body finally begins to relax. The historical fact here is simple. The Great Plains often saw winter temperatures plunge below zero, with winds so relentless that European explorers described them as unceasing knives. Yet entire communities lived through countless such winters inside these skin tents. They didn't just survive, they thrived enough to raise children, tell stories, and carry out sacred ceremonies. That alone should make you pause and wonder, what did they know that many modern campers forget? And here's a quirky tidbit. Some early traders recorded that newcomers often mistook the glow of tipis at night for fairy lanterns spread across the prairie. Imagine cresting a ridge and seeing dozens of cones lit softly from within, like a field of earthly stars, each one holding families wrapped in warmth. Historians still argue whether the primary genius of the tipi was its aerodynamics, able to stand against those prairie gusts, or its portability, allowing people to chase the herds and dodge the worst of the storms. But what no one denies is that this structure, humble as it seems, carried a design brilliance that balanced every need: warmth, safety, and movement. Inside, you hear the wind sighing outside the hides, the occasional rattle of poles as they flex. You notice how the space feels alive. The fire throws shadows that sway gently on the curved walls. Your senses catch the rhythm of life in such a home, soft voices murmuring, a baby shifting under blankets, someone adjusting the fire with a stick so embers don't die. It's intimate, communal, a shelter designed not just to house people but to bring them close together. Picture lying back now, your head against folded robes. The ground beneath has been padded with reeds, grasses, maybe even a layer of earth raised up to block the seeping frost. You feel the insulation immediately, as though the cold has been politely asked to wait outside. If you close your eyes, the snowstorm beyond the flap might as well be another world entirely. There's also something about the way sound behaves in a tipi. The cone shape carries voices upward, softening them, making conversations feel private and hushed. You hear a grandmother telling a tale, her words weaving with the fire's crackle, lulling children to sleep. Someone chuckles softly at a joke that probably wouldn't make sense to an outsider, and the flames continue their steady, hypnotic dance, shadows flickering like gentle phantoms along the sloping hide. You think of how fragile human life is, and yet how clever people become when necessity presses. A sheet of hide, a circle of poles, a well-placed fire pit. Suddenly the line between life and death shifts in your favor. Would you, in their place, know what to do? Or would you, like many settlers who perished of exposure, underestimate the ferocity of this land? The first lesson of surviving prairie nights is clear. Shelter is not just walls and roof. It is design in harmony with nature's mood swings. The tipi wasn't built to fight the wind, but to bend with it, to let smoke rise freely, to welcome the fire's heat without trapping its deadly fumes. It was, in its own way, a breathing creature exhaling smoke, inhaling warmth, alive in the night. So here you lie, your breathing slowing, your body sinking into layered furs. Outside, the snow thickens, muffling the prairie into silence. Inside, the tipi holds steady, a small beacon of resilience. And as the flames soften to embers, you can't help but marvel at the ingenuity that let entire nations of people sleep soundly, night after frozen night, in what outsiders once dismissed as mere tents. You stay curled in that warm hollow, but now your attention shifts to the walls themselves. They aren't just fabric stretched thin, they're hides, thick and heavy, drawn from the vast herds of buffalo that once darkened the horizon. Each hide is stitched carefully, overlapping to prevent seams from gaping in the wind. You run your hand over the surface. It feels rough, faintly oily, and it smells of earth and smoke. This is the first real secret of winter survival in a tipi. Buffalo hides turned what looked like fragile tents into sturdy cocoons. Historically, buffalo provided almost every necessity of life for plains tribes. Their meat filled bellies, their bones became tools, and their hides, especially the thick, winter coats, were turned into coverings that defied the cold. A properly tanned buffalo hide could repel snowflakes and even shed rain, its dense fibers acting like nature's waterproof canvas. The hides used for tipis were often smoked, which preserved them and gave them that dark, musky scent you notice when you lean closer. That smoke treatment wasn't just practical, it made the hides resistant to insects and rot, ensuring the tent coverings could last season after season. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some early accounts claim that the hides used for ceremonial tipis were painted with symbols that not only told stories but also seemed to trap warmth in a psychological sense. Families swore they felt more comfortable under hides, painted with protective imagery, like being tucked beneath a guardian's gaze. It's hard to say whether the paint changed the temperature, but it certainly shaped the feeling of safety, which can matter just as much when you're falling asleep in a snowstorm. Historians still debate whether buffalo hide coverings were inherently superior to the canvas that traders later introduced. Canvas was lighter, easier to transport, and quicker to replace. But many elders insisted that nothing equaled the insulating weight of hides, especially in midwinter. You might imagine the difference as sleeping under a thick duvet versus a thin sheet. One traps heat, pressing close and heavy. The other flaps restlessly in the wind. Inside the tipi, those hides creak when gusts push against them, but they don't tear. The overlapping edges are secured tightly to the poles with rawhide thongs, and near the bottom, stones or wooden pegs keep the covering flush with the ground. You picture the wind howling outside, its energy meeting that dense barrier and sliding harmlessly over the curved shape. The tipi doesn't fight the wind, it guides it around, like water flowing around a rock in a stream. You also notice the way the hide glows faintly orange in the firelight. Each flicker of flame inside sets the walls alive with shifting patterns, making the entire interior feel like a living lantern. The hides breathe, letting a trace of air seep through, enough to prevent suffocation but not enough to chill the sleepers. It's a delicate balance, one refined over centuries of trial and error. Run your fingers lower, near the base, and you feel snow packed against the hides from outside. This wasn't an accident. Families sometimes press snow against the bottom edge deliberately, sealing any gaps and adding a frozen wall of insulation. Paradoxically, snow so feared by those unfamiliar with it became another layer of defense when handled correctly. You glance around and realize each hide panel might once have been a living animal charging across the plains. There's a strange intimacy in knowing that the very creature that fed the camp now shields it from death. To many native peoples, the buffalo was more than a resource. It was a relative, honored in ceremonies and thanked for its sacrifice. So when you lie down tonight under a buffalo hide, you are not simply shielded by fur and skin, you are wrapped in a relationship stretching back generations. Your breathing steadies as you listen to the low moan of the wind outside, muffled now to a whisper. The walls may look thin to an outsider, but inside you feel a womb-like enclosure. The hides hold heat, soften sound, and dim the harsh light of moon and snow. And as you close your eyes, you realize the genius lies not only in the materials but in the way people understood and honored them. A sheet of buffalo hide was never just leather. It was warmth, safety, and memory all stitched into the fabric of daily survival. The fire inside that conical shelter flickers gently, and your gaze rises toward the very top where the smoke finds its way out. You notice the deliberate gap left between two poles, a sort of living chimney. At first, you wonder why such an opening wouldn't simply let the cold rush in. But the truth is more intricate. This vent was the balancing act that made winter nights survivable. Without it, smoke would choke the air, eyes would sting, and children would cough awake. With it, the tipi became not just a tent, but a functioning hearth, a breathing chamber where flame and humans coexisted through long nights. Accounts from early explorers describe in plain detail how vital this vent was. They often marveled that entire families could sleep within arm's reach of a fire without suffocating. The arrangement was calculated. Smoke drifted upward, pulled by the draft, while fresh air entered near the base. The result was circulation that carried fumes away but held warmth inside. In essence, the people who perfected the tipi understood ventilation long before modern engineers gave it a fancy name. And then there's a curious image preserved in some journals. Visitors noted that on still nights, the smoke hole glowed faintly, like a watchful eye staring into the sky. Travelers out on the prairie could sometimes spot these glowing eyes from afar, hovering above the darkened land. For a weary rider, that distant glimmer meant safety, company, perhaps even a bowl of warm stew waiting beyond the flap. To imagine it now is almost comforting, the prairie itself marked by gentle constellations of firelit vents. Scholars remain divided on one point. Did families adjust the vent flaps constantly through the night, or were they left alone after evening chores? Some argue that vigilance was constant, with someone waking to tug a flap when the wind shifted. Others insist that the design was so well calculated that little intervention was required. The lack of consensus reminds you how much of daily life escapes written record. The small motions, an elder reaching up to shift a hide, a child stirred by a whiff of smoke become mysteries, lost in the quiet between historical lines. Look closely, and you see how the vent flaps are tied to poles that extend down into the tipi. This means you can adjust them from inside, without leaving the warmth. You picture a father leaning up in the dim firelight, tugging on a cord to swing a flap closed against a sudden gust, then settling back onto his furs. Simple, yet ingenious. If the wind veers east, the flaps shift west. If rain lashes down, the opening narrows. Everything is controlled from within, as though the tipi itself responds like a living being, adjusting its breath to the night. The sensory details are subtle but constant. You smell a faint sweetness from the burning wood, carried upward with the smoke. The hides crackle softly when the wind presses, releasing tiny draughts that slip into the flow, feeding the fire's hunger. You feel warmth gather around your body, even as cold air sneaks in low, keeping the flame vigorous. Your skin registers the balance, never too smoky, never too frigid. Of course it wasn't perfect. Sometimes the draft failed, and smoke pooled inside, making eyes water. Children grew restless, coughing in their sleep. But these interruptions didn't undo the system, they simply reminded families to adjust the vent or stir the fire. Imagine lying there, half awake, squinting through the haze, and listening to the low voice of someone muttering, "Needs more draft," as they crawl toward the poles. Those minor rituals, repeated nightly, stitched survival into muscle memory. There is also an intangible layer. Some traditions describe the smoke hole not merely as ventilation but as a spiritual link. The rising smoke carried prayers upward, connecting sleepers to the sky world. To lie beneath that vent was to exist between earth and heaven, between the hearth's warmth and the infinite cold above. A child might drift into dreams watching sparks vanish into the night, believing their ancestors were receiving the message. Whether or not you share the belief, the imagery lingers an opening above, never sealed, keeping people connected to something beyond themselves. You run your hand along the ground again, feeling how the air slides in near the base. The contrast is stark. Icy drafts against your palm, then immediate warmth as you move upward toward the fire's level. The tipi was like a layered cake of climates, cold at the floor, cozy in the sleeping zone, smoky near the peak. Families learned to navigate those layers instinctively, placing bedding at the sweet spot where warmth pooled but fumes had thinned. It was subtle environmental engineering, invisible to outsiders who might simply see a cone of hides. Think of how many settlers tried to copy the idea, clumsily. They built cabins with poor chimneys, leaving interiors stifling or dangerously smoky. Others pitched tents without vents, waking up with headaches from smouldering fires. Yet the native design, refined over centuries, solved those problems with materials at hand: poles, hides, cords. It makes you wonder, would you have known to leave that opening? Or would you have sealed it tight against the cold, only to choke yourself before dawn? Your ears catch another sound, the faint flutter of the flaps overhead when the wind tugs at them. It's almost soothing, a reminder that the shelter is alive and reactive. You think of the flap like an eyelid, blinking slowly in the night. Every adjustment is both mechanical and symbolic, guarding the balance between survival and suffocation. And so, lying there, you begin to appreciate the depth of knowledge encoded in this single feature. A hole at the top, controlled by hides on paper. It sounds simple, even obvious. But in practice, it is the fulcrum of life inside the tipi, the point where fire becomes ally rather than enemy. Without it, nights would be unbearable. With it, people could fall asleep to the murmur of flames, breathing freely, cradled in warmth. Imagine drifting off, watching smoke threads spiral into the night sky. Your last thought before sleep might be that those thin wisps carry your warmth into the stars, your family's presence marked against the cold universe. It is a thought both humbling and comforting. The tipi breathes with you, venting your fears, holding your heat. And outside, the prairie wind keeps howling, unaware that inside this cone of hides and poles, humans have learned to turn its fury into gentle rest. You roll onto your side, and as you do, you notice how little space separates you from the next person. Elbows brush, breath mingles. At first, you might find it stifling, but after only a few minutes, the comfort is undeniable. In the dead of winter, proximity was survival. Families didn't scatter into corners, they nested together in a tight circle, a ring of warmth inside the wider ring of the tipi itself. Contemporary reports confirm that communal sleeping was not an accident but a deliberate technique. Early observers described entire households, grandparents, parents, children lying shoulder to shoulder under layers of furs. The human body, after all, is a radiant furnace, releasing heat that would otherwise be wasted. By pressing together, people created a microclimate warmer than any single fire could produce. In a land where nighttime temperatures plummeted below freezing, such an arrangement turned fragile skin into a renewable resource. One little-known anecdote comes from a trader who spent a winter night in a Lakota camp. He recalled being startled awake by the sound of soft laughter when he tried to scoot to the edge for space. An elder pulled him back into the pile, explaining in accented English, "If you sleep alone, you freeze alone." It was half joke, half warning, and he quickly learned that modest discomfort was preferable to frostbite. There is ongoing discussion about just how much this closeness was cultural versus practical. Some researchers maintain that it was mainly a survival strategy born of necessity. Others suggest that intimacy itself was valued, and the heat it generated was simply a fortunate side effect. What is clear is that the nightly ritual of lying close reinforced bonds as much as it preserved life. When bodies pressed together, so did hearts and memories. Children fell asleep to the rhythm of their mother's breathing, and elders dozed with the warmth of kin pressed at their backs. The sensory richness of that closeness is easy to imagine. You hear faint snores weaving with the pop of the fire. You feel the weight of a shared robe being tugged as someone shifts. You smell a mix of wood smoke, leather, and the faint animal musk of furs. These may sound oppressive to modern sensibilities, but in the moment, they were as reassuring as a lullaby. Each breath warmed the next. Each heartbeat became part of a collective rhythm that lulled the whole group towards slumber. Of course, challenges existed. Infants squirmed, children argued for elbow space. Someone's cough rattled through the night. Yet even these annoyances were absorbed into the flow of communal life. To be close was to share not only heat but also inconveniences. The tipi demanded patience, empathy, and constant negotiation of space, but the reward was waking alive. Archaeological evidence suggests that bedding was arranged in arcs around the fire pit, with headrests or small bundles serving as pillows. People angled themselves, so feet pointed toward the fire, heads toward the wall. This meant toes and legs soaked up the strongest heat, while faces stayed in the cooler zone closer to the hides. It was a careful choreography, invisible to outsiders but perfected across generations. You picture it now, a circle of bodies, furs layered above, embers glowing at the center. The air grows softer with every exhale, the teepee itself becoming a kind of collective lung. Children murmur half-dreamed words. Someone shifts to throw another stick on the fire, and then silence returns. Modern readers sometimes recoil at the thought of such intimacy, preferring personal space. But imagine the alternative: a lone figure huddled under a blanket, exposed to drafts from every side. The tipi was a family machine, a chamber where togetherness kept skin from freezing and hearts from drifting. There's a lesson here, perhaps. In a world that prizes independence, it can be unsettling to remember that survival often demanded the opposite. Bodies pressed close, not by choice of romance, but by the law of cold, and within that enforced closeness grew tenderness, tolerance, and resilience. Another detail worth savoring is the psychological warmth that came with it. Imagine waking in the middle of the night, hearing the gale outside, and feeling the reassuring presence of loved ones on both sides. You might not see their faces in the dim light, but you know their warmth is real, their breathing steady. That reassurance could mean the difference between restless anxiety and the peace needed to drift back into sleep. Some experts argue that this arrangement also shaped the very social fabric of plains communities. By sleeping close, people normalized interdependence. Children grew up with constant physical connection, elders remained integrated rather than isolated, and family bonds stretched across generations under a single hide roof. Sleep, in this sense, was not just a biological pause but a nightly rehearsal of unity. So you lie there, shoulder to shoulder, lulled by the chorus of breathing. The tipi walls flex as the wind tests them, but inside, the warmth holds steady. It's not just firewood and hides keeping you alive tonight. It's the nearness of others, the merging of body heat into a pool of safety. And as your eyelids grow heavy, you recognize the quiet genius. In a land so merciless, togetherness itself was the softest blanket. You shift on the bedding, and as you do, a surprising sensation rises from below. The ground, which you expect to be hard and icy, holds a faint trace of warmth. You press your palm flat, and the surface feels not merely insulated but actively radiating heat. This was another quiet innovation of winter life inside tipis. The hidden firebeds beneath rugs and robes that warmed sleepers from below, as though the earth itself had been coaxed into partnership. Surviving accounts describe how shallow pits were sometimes dug in the center, or even beneath sleeping areas, lined with stones or packed earth, where embers could be buried. The technique was straightforward yet brilliant. Once heated by fire, stones retained warmth for hours, slowly releasing it upward into the bedding. In this way, The teepee became a natural oven, gentle, steady, and far safer than a roaring blaze. People lay down not on frozen soil but on a platform infused with stored fire. You might smile to learn that travelers occasionally mistook these setups for primitive, underfloor heating. Imagine their surprise when, in the middle of the night, they shifted a mat and discovered glowing coals slumbering beneath. Some even panicked, fearing the tent would ignite, but the technique was well controlled, relying on careful layering of soil, ash, and stone. Families had perfected the art of using fire's energy without letting it consume them. Researchers continue to puzzle over how common this practice was. Some argue it was an everyday winter method. Others believe it was reserved for particularly harsh nights or specific tribes. Archaeological traces are rare. Ashes disperse, stones scatter, so certainty eludes us. But enough written observations survive to suggest that, at least in some communities, the ground itself joined the nightly effort to keep the cold at bay. Consider the sensory experience of such warmth. You lie back, layers of furs above, but beneath you, a faint pulse radiates upward. It feels like sleeping on the belly of some great animal, steady and dependable. The cold outside becomes irrelevant. Your body is cradled between heat rising from below and heat falling from the fire's glow above. Every joint loosens, every muscle softens, until even the howling wind seems like a distant memory. The practical wisdom here is impressive. Fires built openly on the surface could scorch hides or suffocate sleepers, but by embedding embers underground, families turned danger into safety. The earth itself became insulation, buffering flame and holding warmth in reserve. It is a reminder of how deeply people observed their environment, stone's ability to store heat, soil's talent for dampening flame, air's need to circulate. Every detail mattered, and every mistake could be fatal. Picture the preparations. As twilight falls, members of the household gather to heat stones until they glow faintly. Using sticks and antler tongs, they roll these stones into shallow pits, then cover them with soil. Mats of reeds, grasses, or rawhide are laid over top, creating a barrier between embers and bedding. Finally, furs are spread across the surface. By the time everyone settles in, the ground radiates a warmth that lingers long into the night. It's a system so clever that modern campers have attempted to replicate it, often with clumsy results. Yet here, it was second nature, passed quietly from elder to youth. A curious side note emerges in some oral traditions. People spoke of sleeping on the fire's memory. Embers buried beneath them were imagined as dreams of the flame, still alive but no longer visible. To rest on this memory was to be held by both fire and earth, a union of elements that kept death at arm's length. You might find the poetry unnecessary when your body is simply grateful for warmth, but to those who lived in such intimacy with the land, symbolism and survival rarely stood apart. Now think of the psychological comfort. You know the cold cannot seep through the floor because the floor itself glows with life. You know the fire cannot die entirely because its ghost lies beneath you. Even in your deepest sleep, that awareness lingers, smoothing fears and quieting the restless stir of the night. It is one thing to lie beside a fire that might gutter out. It is another to lie upon its lasting imprint. Some specialists suggest this technique also saved fuel. Rather than burning through logs all night, families could bank a few stones at dusk and rely on their slow radiation. In a land where resources were precious, efficiency meant survival. Why feed flames constantly when a single evening's blaze could provide warmth until morning? Such wisdom wasn't written in manuals but inscribed in habits, tested by centuries of trial. The experience of lying above one of these pits is difficult to convey. The warmth is not sharp like sitting by a fire. It is mellow, steady, as though the ground has grown compassionate. You roll onto your side, and your hip doesn't ache against frost. It is cushioned by heat. You stretch your legs, and instead of cramps from cold muscles, you feel a languid heaviness pulling you towards sleep. The earth has become a bedfellow, sharing back the energy poured into it. And yet the system wasn't flawless. Stones sometimes cracked from heat, sending tiny shards into the soil. Embers occasionally burned longer than expected, scorching mats if left untended. Families had to maintain vigilance, balancing risk and reward. Still, the practice endured because its benefits outweighed its hazards. Survival is rarely tidy. It is a dance of compromise, guided by experience and intuition. One visiting missionary once remarked, perhaps with envy, that he had never slept warmer than in a hut of hides with the ground itself alive beneath me. He had arrived skeptical, imagining tipis as drafty shelters fit only for desperate wanderers. By dawn, he admitted the sophistication exceeded his expectations. Such testimonies remind us that what looks primitive to outsiders often masks layers of subtle intelligence. So you lie here, heavy-eyed, cocooned by fur and leather, warmed from below by firebeds. Outside, the snow thickens, pressing silently against the teepee's sides. But within, the air is tranquil, touched by heat from above, from the circle of bodies beside you, and now from the earth itself. You have entered a space where every element, hide, flame, soil, stone, plays its role in protecting life. Your breath slows. The crackle of distant embers blends with the whisper of the wind. The night could be endless, the cold merciless, yet you are safe. You sleep not just on ground, but on the memory of fire, carried into dreams by warmth that seeps through every layer. And as you drift, you realize survival has always been about more than brute force. It has been about listening to the earth, to the fire, to one another, until even the fiercest winter night becomes bearable. The night deepens, and you tug another layer over yourself. It is heavier than cloth, denser than any blanket you've ever known. You run your fingers across the surface and feel the silken nap of wolf fur, then the rougher hide of deer beneath it. Someone else has piled rabbit skins along the edges, small but effective, filling gaps where drafts might sneak in. Every surface of your body sinks under the weight, and suddenly you understand why these people never froze to death in the bitter prairie winters. It is well documented in explorers' notes that winter sleeping in the Great Plains was never a matter of one blanket. Entire stacks of hides, buffalo, elk, deer, coyote, rabbit were layered in complex arrangements. A base layer of grasses and mats kept moisture away. Above that came a thick robe of buffalo hide, hair turned inward to trap warmth. On top of that, lighter pelts were thrown in casual abundance, each one adding not just heat but softness. It was bedding by accumulation, a quilt built from animals rather than fabric. Travelers often remarked with surprise at the sheer weight of these coverings. One fur trader joked that it took 2 strong men just to lift the bedding at dawn. He claimed he slept so deeply that when a storm rattled the tipi poles, he didn't wake until someone pried him out from under the furs. Amusing or exaggerated, the image still conveys the astonishing density of these makeshift quilts. Experts remain divided on which animals provided the best insulation. Some argue that buffalo robes, with their thick undercoats, were unmatched. Others point to wolf or coyote pelts, prized for their ability to shed frost without soaking. There's no final agreement, and perhaps there never will be. Families used whatever the hunt provided, arranging pelts according to need and instinct rather than formula. The diversity of hides was itself an advantage. If one grew damp, another stayed dry. If one was stiff, another was supple. The combination mattered more than the single source. Imagine lying beneath this pile. At first it feels overwhelming, like being pressed into the earth. Then, as minutes pass, the weight steadies your breathing, slows your pulse, and draws you downward into a comfort so profound it silences the mind. Modern weighted blankets claim therapeutic benefits, but here the principle existed centuries earlier. The sheer heft of fur was not only warmth but reassurance, pressing back against the cold and against your worries. Each pelt carried its own scent and story. The wolf hide held a trace of musk, sharp but protective, reminding you of the predator's keen strength. The deer skin smelled faintly of grass and soil, gentler and familiar. Rabbit pelts, soft as whispers, added a sweetness to the mix. Together, the aromas created a living perfume of the prairie, earthy and grounding. Falling asleep, wrapped in those scents, was falling asleep in relationship with the land itself. The tactile sensations were equally varied. Your cheek might brush against silky guard hairs one moment, then coarse mane the next. Fingers explored textures without thought, tracing the patterns of survival. For children, such sensations formed memories. Dreams always carried the feel of fur, as natural as the sound of wind or the taste of roasted meat. These weren't luxuries, they were the very fabric of existence, as essential as breath. There's also the matter of sound. Pelts do not rustle like woven cloth. They shift heavily, with a muffled thump or a low creak, noises that quickly fade into background. When someone adjusted their bedding, the entire pile moved as one organism, sighing under its own weight. To a listener half asleep, it could sound like the slow breathing of some great beast, surrounding you, protective rather than threatening. Resourcefulness extended further. Smaller scraps of fur were tucked into boots or mittens, ensuring toes and fingers did not stiffen overnight. Hunters sometimes kept strips of rabbit skin expressly for wrapping around infants, layering them inside larger robes. In extreme conditions, people even lay inside buffalo hides still bearing traces of fat, the natural oils adding another barrier against freezing. It was not comfortable by modern standards, but it was effective, and effectiveness meant life. One curious observation from a 19th century soldier mentions that after sharing space in a tipi, he woke covered in frost on his outermost blanket while beneath he was sweating. He realized that the hides themselves encouraged condensation, forming a frozen shell outside while trapping heat inside. In a sense, each sleeper became a furnace, steaming the inner layers while the cold turned the top into an icy crust. Strange as it sounds, this system prevented warmth from escaping further, like a natural thermos. The visual image inside the teepee was striking. By lamplight or fireglow, heaps of fur looked like living mounds, as though wolves, deer, and buffalo still slumbered beside their human kin. In some traditions, this resemblance was intentional. Families believed they slept not alone but accompanied by the spirits of the animals that had given their hides. Each layer was both blanket and companion, a reminder of reciprocity. The animal sheltered the human, and the human honored the animal through prayer and ritual. No consensus exists on whether pelts were always carefully sorted or simply piled as available. Some evidence suggests elaborate arrangements for ceremonies, with matching hides aligned in patterns. Others point to everyday practicality: warmth first, order later. Either way, the result was unmistakable. Even in the bleakest cold, even when snow pressed in from every direction, sleepers remained alive beneath a fortress of fur. Now imagine yourself drifting beneath those covers. The fire's glow softens against the hide walls, the murmur of breath circles you, and the heaviness of pelts pins you into stillness. There is no anxiety about waking cold. There is only the slow weight of survival pressing into your bones. You exhale, and your breath warms the pocket of air around your face. You inhale, and the scents of earth and animal fill your lungs. Sleep is not escape here. It is a pact between you, the fire, the furs, and the world outside. Modern people sometimes marvel at such arrangements, wondering how anyone tolerated the smells, the weight, the closeness. But when you face a prairie night with no electricity, no central heating, and no rescue if frost sets in, preferences quickly yield to necessity. And yet, even beyond necessity, there is beauty. To sleep swaddled in the very skins of the creatures that roamed your land is to blur the line between human and environment. You are not above nature or outside it, you are inside its embrace, part of its cycle, sharing warmth across species. So you shift again, sinking deeper into the pile. The wolf fur brushes your cheek, the buffalo robe presses your chest, and the rabbit skins nestle at your feet. Every layer carries heat, memory, and protection. Outside, Snowflakes dance against the tipi walls. Inside, you are immovable, secured beneath a mountain of furs. And as your eyelids close, you feel the truth of it. Sometimes the simplest path to survival is simply to let the world wrap itself around you, heavy and enduring, until dawn returns. You stir in your sleep, shifting slightly, and feel that you are not lying flat on frozen ground at all. Instead, your body rests upon a surface that feels springier, cushioned by something between earth and bedding. When you press down, there's a faint give, almost like lying on a woven mat. Then you realize the people who built this shelter had no intention of sleeping directly on the unforgiving prairie floor. They lifted themselves, even just a little, away from the cold, creating raised sleeping platforms lined with reeds and grasses. Archaeological digs and recorded descriptions show how carefully these platforms were arranged. In some tipis, bundles of willow branches, cattails, or tall prairie grasses were lashed together to form mats. These mats were then set atop shallow layers of earth or stone, creating a floor above the ground. On this went hides and robes, building a sleeping surface that resisted dampness and cold seeping up from below. In a world where the soil itself could feel like ice, this innovation kept bodies just high enough to stay dry and warm. One curious detail emerges in accounts from French trappers. They remarked on how springy the bedding felt compared to the stiff cots they carried in their wagons. One even compared it to lying on a hay mattress in a farmhouse, surprised to find such comfort in what he had dismissed as a savage tent. That surprise reveals a common theme. Outsiders often underestimated the sophistication of what they saw. Scholars continue to debate whether these platforms were permanent fixtures or improvised as needed. Some argue that families rebuilt them every time the tipi moved, weaving mats anew at each site. Others suggest they carried rolled-up bedding mats from camp to camp, ready-made for the next shelter. With no definitive evidence, the truth may have been a mixture. Local reeds used when abundant, portable mats when travel demanded speed. Either way, the principle remained: nobody slept directly on frozen soil unless forced by dire circumstances. The sensory difference is profound. Imagine lying on the bare ground in midwinter, the frost leaching into your bones, joints stiffening, every breath shivering your ribs. Now imagine lying just a few inches above that, on a mat that breathes, with grasses and hides insulating you from below. Your back feels cushioned, your hips don't ache, and warmth pools around you instead of being pulled downward. That small elevation changes the entire experience of the night. The reed mats also had a practical bonus. They allowed air to circulate underneath. This kept moisture from pooling and prevented mold from forming. Anyone who has camped in damp conditions knows the misery of waking in soaked bedding. By lifting themselves just enough, families avoided that hazard. Dry bedding meant warm bedding, and warm bedding meant life. It is easy to imagine the daily ritual of building these platforms. Children might gather cattails or reeds in summer, elders directing them to the best patches near riverbanks. Women wove the stalks into mats with practiced speed, hands moving rhythmically, strands bending and folding with familiarity. By the time winter arrived, these mats were ready, rolled and stacked with the rest of the household goods. When the tipi was raised, the mats were unrolled, forming the first layer of comfort. Everyone contributed, and everyone benefited. A little-known observation comes from a 19th century missionary who slept in a tipi one winter. He wrote that when he awoke, he was astonished to find frost covering the grasses beneath his mat, while his body had stayed warm above. The mat had trapped the condensation, freezing it safely away from him. "I lay above a frozen carpet," he remarked, "yet never once did the chill pierce me. Such a simple design, and yet it transformed hardship into rest." There is also the psychological side to consider. Sleeping on a raised surface feels different than sleeping on bare ground. It elevates you, symbolically as well as physically. Some oral traditions suggest that people believed lying slightly above the earth protected sleepers from certain spirits that wandered at night. Whether or not you accept the spiritual meaning, the comfort was undeniable. To be lifted, however modestly, was to reclaim power over the cold that sought to drag you down. And then there is the sound. When someone shifted on a mat of reeds, you would hear a soft creak, like whispering grass in the wind. It blended with the crackle of the fire and the sighs of sleepers, forming a natural lullaby. Children may have drifted into dreams listening to that faint rustle, associating it forever with warmth and safety. Imagine now the physical layout inside the tipi. Around the fire pit in the center, arcs of raised bedding formed a circle. Each family member had a spot, heads toward the wall, feet angled toward the fire. The raised mats meant that even when snowmelt seeped into the soil, sleepers stayed above the wetness. They were suspended, not far, but just far enough to matter. This was survival measured in inches, not miles. Modern campers sometimes try to replicate the effect with foam pads or inflatable mattresses. Yet the principle is identical. Separate the body from the cold earth, and comfort multiplies. It's striking to realize that long before plastic or nylon existed, the people of the plains already solved this problem with plants and skill. One fur trader confessed in his diary that after several weeks of sleeping on reed mats inside tipis, he dreaded returning to his own military cot. "I shall miss the grass," he wrote, "for it bends where I do and never complains." His words are both practical and poetic, capturing how quickly one adapts to comfort when it is wisely designed. So here you lie, your body no longer pressed against frost. You feel cushioned, buoyed as though the earth itself has softened for you. The fire glows, pelts weigh heavy above, and now the ground below joins in kindness. You are sandwiched between generosity, the hides above, the reeds below, and in that embrace, sleep becomes not a desperate grasp at warmth, but a gentle drift into dreams. The genius of raised sleeping platforms was not just insulation, but dignity. People did not merely endure winter nights on the bare ground. They shaped their environment to support them. That shaping was quiet, humble, invisible to many, yet its effect was profound. In every creak of grass, in every dry night's sleep, it whispered the same truth. Survival lies in small elevations, in lifting oneself just enough above the cold to rest without fear. You open your eyes in the middle of the night, just for a moment, and see that the fire hasn't gone out. The embers are still glowing, their light pulsing gently like the heartbeat of the tipi itself. Someone has stirred them, added a few sticks, maybe shifted the logs so they burn slower. It is not chance. It is vigilance. These fires did not die when people fell asleep. They were coaxed, nudged, and carefully watched, ensuring that warmth endured until dawn. Historical records describe the practice of maintaining what they called a living fire. Families never let flames extinguish completely. Instead, they banked them, pushing logs together, covering embers with ash so they smoldered instead of flaring. By doing so, they conserved fuel while preserving heat. At intervals, someone would stir the ashes, letting the embers breathe again. The tipi was rarely without that soft, reddish glow. One rather surprising account comes from a fur company clerk, who claimed he was amazed to find the same fire glowing night after night inside a single lodge for months on end. He wrote that it was as though the fire itself belonged to the family, a member that never left them. His astonishment makes sense. For him, fire was something built and rebuilt each day. But for the people here, it was continuity, a flame passed forward through time, nurtured by every hand that fed it. Researchers remain divided over whether specific roles were assigned for this nighttime tending. Some ethnographers suggest that women primarily managed the fire, rising in the night to adjust fuel. Others argue that duties rotated among household members, with even older children sometimes responsible for poking the coals. Because diaries and oral histories vary, there is no single conclusion. What is clear is that someone always watched, listened, and acted when the fire began to falter. Think about how this vigilance reshaped the rhythm of sleep. Nights were not entirely still. They pulsed with tiny interruptions. Someone coughed, rose, shuffled over, nudged the fire, then lay back down. These moments of half-wakefulness became normal, woven into the fabric of rest. Unlike the modern idea of solid 8-hour sleep, nights here were segmented, social, and responsive. You might drift in and out, aware of embers sparking, reassured by the sound of logs settling. The sensory atmosphere was magical. Imagine the glow illuminating faces briefly when someone bent to stir the fire, their cheekbones lit orange, shadows thrown across the curved hide walls. The smell of fresh wood joined the heavier scent of buffalo hide. The faint crackle reassured everyone that the cold remained at bay. Then the caretaker returned to their bedding, and darkness deepened again, punctuated only by the pulse of coals. Children grew up learning this ritual almost before they could speak. They knew that without tending, the cold would creep in, breath would frost, and sleep would fracture into shivers. So they learned to listen, the sigh of embers fading, the hiss of ash collapsing, the silence that meant flames needed help. To live in a teepee was to become attuned to fire as a companion, not merely a tool. A missionary once complained that he could never sleep through the night in such conditions, disturbed by people constantly moving to adjust the fire. But he also admitted, grudgingly, that he was warmer in that tipi than he ever was in his own cabin. He seemed to miss the larger truth. These small interruptions were not disruptions but safeguards, proof that community worked even when everyone was supposed to be asleep. There is another layer too. Many tribes considered fire sacred, a presence deserving respect. Tending it was not only practical but spiritual, a form of guardianship. The flame was alive, and to let it die was to neglect a relationship. Families whispered thanks to the embers, treating them not as mere fuel but as kin. To wake in the night and see a glow was to be reminded that life itself continued, carried forward by that elemental companion. Picture yourself half asleep, hearing the faint rustle of someone rising. You don't open your eyes at first. You just listen. The soft step on reed mats, the quiet clink of wood against stone, the puff of breath as ash stirs. Then comes the renewed crackle, the fresh flare of orange behind your eyelids. Only then do you let yourself drift back under, trusting the warmth to hold. That cycle repeats, again and again, until the first pale light of dawn. Fuel was not wasted carelessly. Wood on the plains could be scarce, and buffalo dung was often used instead. Dried carefully, it burned slowly, producing steady heat with less smoke than you might expect. Outsiders sneered at this fuel, yet it proved remarkably efficient. A pile of dung patties beside the fire ensured the night would not turn bitter. The smell was distinct, yes, but in the mingled scents of hide and smoke it became another familiar note, hardly noticed after a while. Some families even arranged night watches, especially in harsher months. Elders or adolescents might sit up for a time, poking the coals, humming quietly, telling stories to themselves while others slept. This vigil gave shape to the night, a reminder that the community never left itself defenseless. In a way, the firekeeper was as much a guard against cold as against predators. They defended life by keeping the flame alive. The psychological comfort was immense. Imagine waking suddenly to silence, no glow, no crackle. Panic would rise instantly. But if you opened your eyes and saw that steady orange, you could sigh, roll over, and fall back into slumber. The fire's persistence was reassurance embodied in light. It was the thread that stitched dusk to dawn, connecting every sleeper through shared dependence. You can almost hear it now, the gentle pop, the occasional hiss when a log released sap. The tipi walls glowed faintly, alive with patterns of flame. Shadows moved softly, like ancestral spirits drifting above. Outside, the wind screamed, but inside, the fire answered in its own language, steady, calm, unbroken. This is the truth of survival here. It was never passive. Families didn't simply hope the cold would spare them. They acted, constantly, in tiny, nearly invisible ways, turning embers, adjusting mats, adding fuel. Survival was diligence, woven into every hour of the night. And because of that, mornings arrived with people alive, ready to face another day. So you rest again, knowing someone else will rise when the embers need coaxing. The tipi breathes, the fire glows, and the night carries on. Your body drifts deeper, comforted by the thought that even as you sleep, care continues. The fire never dies, and neither do you. Your stomach growls faintly, even in this half-dreaming state, and you realize that what you ate before lying down has as much to do with your comfort as the fire or the hides. In the bitter winters of the Great Plains, food wasn't only about filling bellies, it was fuel for the internal furnace. Nights in the teepee were survivable, because people knew how to eat in ways that turned their very bodies into heaters. Surviving accounts from traders and explorers consistently remark on the fat-rich meals served in cold months. Buffalo meat, especially cuts heavy with marrow and fat, was prized not only for flavor but for the slow-burning energy it provided through the night. Roasted ribs, pemmican, a mixture of dried meat, berries, and rendered fat, and stews thick with marrow bones formed the core of winter sustenance. When you crawled under your pile of furs after eating such a meal, your body radiated warmth like banked coals. A curious anecdote comes from one fur trader who confessed that after sharing a winter meal with a Lakota family, he felt so warm under the hides that he had to peel off one layer of fur to sleep comfortably. He was shocked, he wrote, that food could make such a difference, his body generating heat long after the fire had dimmed. He admitted, somewhat sheepishly, that in his own camp, he often shivered through the night because his diet lacked the richness of the people who had welcomed him. Researchers are still debating just how central fat consumption was to winter survival. Some argue it was absolutely essential, that without a diet heavy in rendered fat, the human body simply could not endure sub-zero nights. Others suggest that while fat helped, the combination of fire, hides, and shelter was enough on its own. The lack of consensus underscores how intertwined all these strategies were: diet, design, and discipline, working together in ways that outsiders often failed to appreciate. Imagine the sensory world of those meals. You sit by the fire, steam rising from a pot, the smell of roasted meat filling the tipi. A ladle dips into thick stew, pouring chunks of marrow-rich buffalo and starchy roots into a wooden bowl. You lift it, sip slowly, and feel the warmth spread downward into your chest and belly. That heat doesn't fade quickly. It lingers, converting to energy that your body will spend slowly, hour by hour, as you lie still beneath the furs. Children, too, were encouraged to eat heartily before bed, even if they were sleepy. Parents knew that full bellies meant warm children. Babies were sometimes given broth, their tiny bodies infused with nutrients that kept shivers away. Everyone carried some of the fire inside them when they curled up for the night. Fuel conservation extended to the body as well. Eating meant the body could burn fat for heat instead of muscle. The people of the plains understood this instinctively, if not in scientific terms. They hunted buffalo not only for hides, but for the fat that made nights bearable. Bones were cracked open, marrow scooped out, and even rendered fat stored in bladders or hides for later use. Nothing was wasted, because everything was survival. Another curious note from early observers. Some reported that before bed, children were sometimes given chunks of tallow to chew. Not for flavor, though some may have enjoyed it, but for the steady warmth it produced. Outsiders often recoiled at the practice, unable to see past their own cultural lens. Yet the wisdom was clear. A child with fat in their belly was a child who would wake alive. The psychological comfort of food also mattered. Imagine sitting in a warm glow, sharing a meal while the storm howls outside. The taste of fat, rich and satisfying, reassures you that you have resources, that you will not go hungry, that the night will pass safely. Eating wasn't just about calories, it was about confidence. That confidence itself became warmth. Some anthropologists suggest that feasting before sleep shaped the very rhythm of plains culture. Nights were not only for rest but also for digestion. Dreams unfolded in bodies busy with processing fat and meat, heat rising as metabolism did its quiet work. People woke not only rested but replenished, ready to hunt or travel again. Sleep and food became inseparable partners, each making the other possible. Now picture yourself after such a meal. You lie back, heavy with fullness, body humming with energy. The fire glows, the hides weigh upon you, and inside, your stomach churns steadily, feeding warmth into your limbs. Outside, snow whips past the tipi, the wind fierce enough to tear through flesh if you faced it bare. But inside, you are a furnace, burning slow, fueled by what the land has given. The soundscape of digestion even added to the communal rhythm. In the stillness, someone's belly might rumble softly, another might sigh contentedly, and children giggled before drifting into sleep. These small bodily noises blended with the fire's crackle and the wind's muffled howl, creating a kind of nighttime symphony unique to life in the tipi. One French explorer described his amazement at being served a bowl of pemmican, a concoction he called the food of forever. It was dense, rich, and lasted for hours inside him. He admitted that after eating it, he felt as if he carried a second fire inside his chest. That fire, combined with the tipi's warmth, made him realize why so few people froze despite the cruelty of the weather. There's something almost poetic about it. The cold attacked from outside, but the answer came from within. Fire in the hearth, fire in the belly, fire in the bones of buffalo that gave their lives. Every element collaborated to keep humans alive through the longest nights. So you turn onto your side now, listening to the slow breathing around you. Each sleeper has eaten well, their bodies radiating heat into the circle. The tipi holds them together, the hides press down, and inside each chest a private furnace hums away. You realize survival isn't just about shelter. It's about preparation, resourcefulness, and respect for the rhythms of nature. To eat was to fight back against the cold, not with weapons, but with warmth that came from inside. As your eyelids grow heavy again, you feel it in yourself, that steady, quiet flame in your belly. It is warmth, not of firewood or furs, but of nourishment, coursing through your veins, a reminder that sometimes the simplest act, eating well before bed, was the difference between life and death on these frozen plains. The fire has settled into a bed of glowing embers, the tipi walls dark except for faint pulses of orange, yet you are not drifting into silence. Around you, voices murmur softly, weaving through the night. It is not loud chatter or raucous laughter, but a low stream of words and song, flowing like a quiet river. Before sleep, families shared warmth not only through fire and hides, but through stories, whispers, and the gentle rhythm of music. Contemporary descriptions from travelers note how common it was for evenings in the tipi to end with storytelling. An elder's voice would rise first, steady and slow, recounting tales of creation, of great hunts, or of trickster spirits. Children, already tucked beneath furs, would listen wide-eyed, their imaginations painting vivid pictures against the hide walls. The cadence of the stories often matched the crackle of the fire, hypnotic and lulling, carrying listeners deeper into rest. These weren't merely tales, they were lessons disguised in narrative, teaching children about courage, humility, and respect for the natural world. One curious observation from a settler who once shared such a night describes how, after hours of travel in bitter cold, he found himself soothed by a song sung barely above a whisper. A grandmother hummed, rocking a child, and the entire tipi seemed to fall into rhythm with her. He admitted he understood none of the words, but he swore the melody warmed him more deeply than the fire. Perhaps it was suggestion, perhaps fatigue, but he left convinced that song itself was another layer of insulation, pressing gently against the cold. Experts disagree on whether these late-night rituals were primarily for children's sake or for everyone. Some argue the songs and stories mainly served to calm little ones before they slept, while others suggest they were equally crucial for adults, binding the group emotionally before silence descended. What cannot be disputed is that these nightly rituals made sleep More than a physical necessity, they made it a communal ceremony. Picture the atmosphere. Shadows stretch long on the hide walls. The fire throws moving images, and a voice carries across the small space, slow and rhythmic. Someone chuckles at a remembered incident. Someone else adds a line to the story, turning it playful. A drumbeat, faint and steady, might tap out time. The tipi fills not with heat alone, but with shared memory, laughter, and reassurance. In that environment, sleep becomes not a solitary surrender, but a collective drift, everyone sliding gently together toward dreams. The sensory details are delicate. The crackle of embers punctuates sentences. A child's laugh rings briefly, then fades into a yawn. The smell of smoke lingers in hair and robes, a constant companion, while the rustle of furs marks someone settling into place. These sounds and smells become the lullaby, their familiarity stronger than any blanket. You can imagine the power of those moments on a long winter night. Outside, winds batter the prairie. Wolves howl across the frozen grasslands. But inside, voices layer over one another, creating a dome of humanity. The tipi is not merely resisting cold, it is asserting life, culture, and joy in the face of harshness. Story and song were defiance as much as comfort, proof that the cold could not silence them. A fur trader once recorded his bafflement at how people laughed heartily on nights when he felt sure they would be too exhausted to speak. He confessed that he envied their resilience, wondering where the strength came from. Perhaps he missed the truth. The laughter was not an afterthought. It was a strategy. To laugh was to relax muscles, to let tension dissolve, to prepare the body for rest. Joy itself was a tool of survival. The intimacy of whispers also mattered. After stories ended and children drifted into sleep, couples spoke softly to one another, sharing private thoughts in the half-dark. The small, hushed voices built intimacy in the circle, reassuring each sleeper that they were seen, heard, and connected. Even silence itself became part of the ritual, a shared silence, heavy with trust, in which everyone could close their eyes knowing they were not alone. Some anthropologists suggest that such practices altered the very architecture of memory. When stories were told night after night, in the same enclosed space, listeners carried those lessons into dreams. They dreamed in the language of their people, in symbols reinforced by song and repetition. The tipi thus became not just a shelter but a school, a classroom where the curriculum was sung softly in the glow of embers. Imagine now your own place in that circle. You are lying with your head on a folded robe, eyes half closed, listening to a tale about a trickster coyote who outsmarts the freezing wind. You smile faintly, the story tickling your imagination. Even though your body is already heavy with sleep, you turn slightly, pressing your cheek against fur, hearing the murmur of voices as they fade. Before you know it, the words are no longer separate from your dreams, they have become part of them. A missionary once remarked, grudgingly, that such evenings seemed childish, filled with laughter and nonsense. But later he admitted that, when alone in his cabin, he missed the sound of voices. The silence of isolation was colder than any wind, he wrote. It is a telling confession. Humans can endure bitter temperatures if surrounded by warmth of spirit, but even mild chill becomes unbearable in solitude. So you listen one last time, eyes closing. A voice still murmurs, a song still hums, and the tipi sways softly in the wind. Outside, winter rages, but inside, stories carry everyone across the threshold of sleep. You realize now that warmth is not only fire and fur. It is laughter, whispers, and song in tangible blankets woven every night, wrapping the heart as securely as any buffalo robe. The night wears on, and eventually dawn begins to creep across the horizon. You are still curled in your cocoon of hides, but a new awareness stirs. The flap of the tipi has been positioned deliberately, and you notice it points toward the east. When the first strands of sunlight break across the prairie, they will shine directly into this doorway, illuminating the interior. This wasn't simply luck or whim. The orientation of the tipi itself carried meaning, both practical and spiritual. Archaeological surveys and ethnographic reports reveal a consistent pattern. Many tribes chose to place their entrances facing east. This ensured that the rising sun poured warmth and light into the lodge at the coldest time of day, just before people stirred from sleep. It was a design that linked shelter to the rhythm of the heavens, aligning daily life with celestial order. The choice offered more than comfort. It meant protection, a way to begin each day in harmony with nature's strongest source of renewal. One evocative story comes from a 19th-century visitor who noted that, at sunrise, families sometimes sat in silence for a moment, letting the rays spill across the floor before they spoke. He described it as though the people were greeting the day itself as a guest entering through the flap. The image is striking light, treated not as background but as presence, joining the circle of sleepers. There is ongoing debate among scholars about whether this orientation was primarily spiritual or pragmatic. Some argue that turning eastward was mainly functional, catching warmth and avoiding prevailing winds from the west. Others insist that symbolism dominated, with the rising sun viewed as sacred and the doorway as an intentional gateway to renewal. The truth may be both. In cultures where spirituality and survival were intertwined, practicality often carried sacred resonance. The sensory experience of that dawn is vivid. Imagine lying under your pelts as the first pale glow filters through the opening. The air still stings with cold, but suddenly a stripe of golden warmth stretches across the tipi floor. Dust motes dance in the beam. Children blink awake, their eyes catching the shimmer. The fire crackles faintly, adding orange to gold. For a moment, the entire space feels transformed, half hearth, half cathedral. The doorway also functioned as a point of defense. By facing east, families could watch the approach of day and visitors alike, while keeping their backs to harsher weather. Winds that tore across the plains from the north and west were blocked, while the gentler eastern breezes carried fewer threats. It was orientation as shield, the tipi standing not just as a home but as a fortress balanced on the compass. One little-known observation from traders notes that in some camps, the entire ring of tipis aligned in harmony, all facing east. To an outsider, it looked like a strange coincidence. To those within, it was deliberate unity, a village that greeted the sun together, every household bound by the same orientation. Imagine standing outside at dawn, dozens of tipis glowing from within as light pierced through their eastern doors. The scene must have been breathtaking, a community orchestrating itself to meet the day. The flap itself could be adjusted, rolled higher to admit more light, lowered to block wind. In mornings of heavy snow, a parent might brush aside drifts piled against the entrance, clearing a path for children to tumble out into the frost. Those moments, laughing, stretching, stepping into crisp air, were framed by the choice of orientation. The sun's warmth met them head-on, easing the sting of cold. There is also a psychological effect to consider. To wake each day facing east is to wake with hope. The darkness of night retreats behind you, and the promise of light greets you directly. For people whose lives were so deeply bound to cycles of nature, this orientation may have offered daily reassurance. Survival required not only warmth of body, but resilience of spirit. Facing the sunrise helped restore that balance. You can picture the silence of those dawns, broken only by the first stirrings of a household. Someone stirs the embers. Someone else pulls on moccasins. Children rub their eyes and blink at the light streaming in. The east-facing doorway means everyone shares the moment together, bathed in glow, reminded that night has passed and life continues. It's not just survival, it's renewal, performed every single morning without fail. A missionary once admitted that he found it difficult to convince people to reorient their lodges near his mission settlement. They insisted the east was correct, refusing to yield even when land boundaries made it awkward. To them, it wasn't negotiable, it was identity woven into shelter. That stubbornness frustrated him, but it speaks volumes about the depth of meaning carried by the simple act of choosing a direction. Even the smallest sensory details reinforce the orientation. You can feel the coolness of air drifting in from the flap at night, and then the gentle warmth when dawn breaks. You can hear the flap rustle as it's lifted, catching the morning wind. You can smell fresh snow melting in sunlight right at the doorway. These experiences etched themselves into memory, making the east-facing entrance not an abstract belief but a lived reality. So you lie here now, eyes closed, waiting. Soon that first light will filter in, cutting across the fire pit and touching your face. It will be cold still, yes, but somehow gentler, as if the day itself is leaning down to kiss you awake. The teepee is more than shelter tonight. It is a compass, a sanctuary aligned with the sky, a structure that not only holds you alive through winter's cruelty, but wakes you in communion with the rising Sunday. You wake in the middle of the night and notice the wind has shifted. It moans harder now, hurling itself against the sides of your tipi, rattling the poles with restless fingers. Yet somehow, the structure doesn't buckle, and the cold doesn't slice in as sharply as you'd expect. Then you remember, you are not alone out here. Dozens of other tipis stand nearby, forming a protective circle. Their hides and poles shoulder the wind together, each lodge shielding the next. Survival in winter wasn't only about what happened inside one tipi. It was about how the village itself was arranged, a design as intentional as the lodges themselves. Surviving maps and early accounts describe how camps were laid out in rings or semicircles, often with entrances all facing the same direction. The tipis on the outer edge bore the brunt of the storm, breaking the wind so that those deeper inside felt less of the force. This wasn't coincidence. Communities understood that to thrive, shelter had to be collective. One tipi was strong, but a village of tipi was nearly indomitable, each cone acting as part of a larger barrier against the relentless prairie gusts. A curious detail comes from an officer who rode into a camp during a blizzard. He remarked in his journal that the noise of the wind lessened dramatically once he entered the circle. It was as if he'd stepped into a fortress of hides, he said, where the fury of the storm was muffled to a low growl. What he perceived as strange was simply the result of geometry and community. Rows of lodges turned their broadest sides to the gale, creating a buffer zone of calmer air inside. Researchers remain divided on whether these arrangements were always symmetrical or varied according to terrain. Some argue that tipis were set in near-perfect rings regardless of location, reflecting ritual order as much as practicality. Others suggest that families adapted layouts to landforms huddling closer near riverbanks, scattering wider across hills. The truth, as usual, may lie between. Order and adaptability worked together, ensuring that every household benefited from collective design. Imagine the sensory experience of being inside such a village at night. Outside the ring, the wind screams unbroken, carrying snow like knives. But within, the sound is muted, softened by the first line of lodges. Fires glow from dozens of vents, smoke drifting into the sky in thin, wavering columns. The light resembles stars anchored to earth, a constellation of human survival. You hear distant laughter, the shuffle of feet, dogs shifting in the snow. The sense of enclosure calms you, reminding you that your tipi is not an isolated speck but part of a living organism, the camp itself. Children must have felt this most keenly. When they stepped outside at dawn, the first thing they saw was not the endless prairie but the ring of other lodges. That sight reassured them that they belonged to something larger. That warmth extended beyond their own family circle. To play in the snow between tipis was to live inside a fortress made of kinship. One traveler noted how the ring also shaped wind patterns so that snowdrifts piled predictably, often at the camp's edge rather than its heart. This meant pathways between lodges remained passable, even in heavy storms. It was another unspoken benefit of collective design. The very forces of nature were redirected, channeled into less threatening shapes. What to an outsider looked like chaos tents scattered across frozen ground was, in fact, meticulous choreography. There's also a cultural layer here. Some oral traditions describe the circle as sacred, mirroring the cycles of the sun, moon, and seasons. To arrange tipis in a ring was not only practical but symbolic, aligning human shelter with cosmic order. At night, when firelight flickered through hide walls, the circle must have looked like a glowing wheel set down upon the earth. Families slept within that wheel, wrapped in both community and meaning. The sounds of such a village at night carried reassurance. You could hear fires crackling from multiple directions, voices drifting through the wind, dogs barking occasionally at shadows. No single tipi was ever alone in silence. Even in sleep, you remained part of the collective, your warmth doubled by the knowledge that others shared the night with you. This psychological comfort, subtle but potent, mattered as much as any physical wall of hides. A fur trader once complained that he could never find privacy in such a camp, surrounded always by people. But later, during a solitary journey, he admitted he longed for the comfort of that circle. Alone, the wind seemed louder, the cold sharper, and the nights longer. Within the camp, those same elements had felt softened, shared. What he had dismissed as confinement, he later recognized as protection. Imagine again the physical sensation. Your tipi shudders under the wind, but the force is blunted by neighbors' lodges. The pressure never falls entirely on you. You feel the warmth of your own fire, but you know others are burning too, their glow spilling into the night. If your fire falters, you can rely on their embers to rekindle it. Survival here was never solitary. It was woven into community, into design that turned fragility into strength. Some anthropologists suggest that the very act of arranging tipis in rings taught lessons about cooperation. Children grew up knowing their family lodge was one among many, that strength came from alignment, not isolation. To orient your home in harmony with others was to accept responsibility for shared survival. The camp itself became a classroom, teaching values of unity, respect, and collective care. So you lie back, listening to the softened wind, comforted by the knowledge that your lodge stands shoulder to shoulder with dozens of others. The village breathes as one, its fires glowing, its hides creaking, its people resting. Outside, the storm still rages, but inside the circle it is gentler, more human. You close your eyes, warmed not only by fire and fur, but by the invisible shield of community. The fortress built not of stone or wood, but of trust, geometry, and kinship. You shift under your pelts and hear a faint sigh nearby, softer and higher pitched than the breathing of adults. A child has stirred, perhaps rolling in sleep, perhaps murmuring a half-formed dream. You notice how the little ones are not scattered randomly across the floor, but bundled into their own snug pockets of warmth. Children in the tipi did not simply sprawl wherever there was space. They were nested, cocooned inside smaller enclosures, swaddled in layers of fur and cloth so their fragile bodies stayed safe through the freezing nights. Written accounts from the 18th and 19th centuries confirm that parents paid careful attention to where children slept. Infants were wrapped tightly, sometimes in cradleboards padded with rabbit fur or moss, and then laid near their mothers. Toddlers often curled together, forming little heaps under small robes within reach of parents' arms. Older children, though given more independence, still remained close enough that a hand could reach across in the dark to reassure them. The tipi's circular layout meant everyone was in view, no child ever truly out of sight. A charming anecdote survives from a trader who shared a night in a Dakota lodge. He noted that when he awoke, he found himself pinned beneath a pile of small bodies. Children, seeking warmth, had crept closer during the night, burrowing into his bedding as if he were part of the family. He laughed at the memory, saying he had never felt so smothered, but also never so safe. That accidental adoption speaks volumes. In the tipi, warmth was communal, not restricted by blood ties alone. Scholars remain divided on how formal these arrangements were. Some argue that children were deliberately placed in the warmest spots between adults, or closest to the fire. Others suggest children naturally gravitated there on their own, finding comfort beside siblings or elders. What cannot be denied is that their survival depended on constant attention, and families adapted in every possible way to keep them alive. The sensory experience of these nests is vivid. Imagine a baby swaddled in rabbit skins, the fur so soft it seems like a second skin. Tiny breaths puff white in the firelight, while the mother's hand rests nearby, ready to pull the infant closer if a draft sneaks in. Children's giggles fade into yawns as they pile together under a buffalo robe, their little feet kicking against one another until they finally surrender to sleep. The tipi itself amplifies this intimacy, the round walls keeping sound close so that even the faintest whimper reaches attentive ears. Protection wasn't only against cold. Nests also shielded children from the dangers of fire. By creating designated spaces, sometimes fenced with low bundles of wood or mats, parents ensured toddlers didn't crawl too near the flames. Safety and warmth intertwined in these careful designs. Children grew up learning where they belonged at night, the same way they learned where to sit in the circle by day. One curious detail recorded by a Jesuit missionary mentions that children were sometimes lulled to sleep by being gently rocked in their cradle boards, which could be leaned against the tipi poles. The rocking motion, combined with the glow of firelight and the murmur of voices, calmed them until they dozed. He remarked almost wistfully that the scene reminded him of European nurseries, yet carried out with materials entirely drawn from the prairie. The universality of parental care shone through the cultural differences. As the storm outside grows harsher, you picture how reassuring these nests must have felt. The children knew nothing of frostbite or hypothermia. What they felt was the warmth of bodies pressed close, the weight of fur above, and the sound of parents breathing. In their memories, winter nights would be less about danger and more about comfort, because their first experiences of the cold were softened by constant protection. Anthropologists suggest this intimacy-shaped personality. Growing up with nightly contact, children learned interdependence early. They absorbed the rhythms of family life not through lectures but through the physical closeness of every night. To fall asleep against a sibling's shoulder, to wake against a parent's arm, such routines etched cooperation into the body as surely as language into the mind. Imagine being a child in that setting. You stir at night, half frightened by the howl of wind against the walls, and instantly you feel another small body beside you. You press close, stealing their warmth, and hear them breathe steadily. Fear dissolves. You close your eyes again, safe in the little cocoon built not only of hides and mats but of shared warmth. One visitor, a soldier hardened by barracks life, remarked in his journal that children in the lodges seemed far less frightened of storms than his own companions on campaign. He marveled that they slept peacefully, even as snow piled high outside. Perhaps, he mused, the difference was that they never slept alone. His observation, though simple, captured something profound. Resilience is born not of toughness, but of tenderness multiplied across many small bodies. The sensory memory lingers as you imagine it. The muffled giggle of a child telling a last-minute joke to a sibling, the soft hush of a mother calming a restless baby, the rhythmic breathing that fills the tipi like a tide. The nests are alive, pulsing with life even as sleep overtakes them. And in that pulse lies the future of the community, protected carefully each night. So you roll onto your side, looking toward the little heap of furs where children are tucked away. You see the glow of firelight against their cheeks, the soft curve of an infant's hand curled against fur. Outside, winter rages still, merciless and vast. But inside, the most fragile lives are swaddled, warmed, guarded by every adult and every technique learned across centuries. Survival is never abstract here. It is personal, intimate, lived each night in the warmth of children's nests. You stir once more and realize the night is not kept by humans alone. Beyond the soft circle of sleepers, other bodies lie close, radiating warmth of their own. Dogs shift and sigh in the shadows, their fur steaming faintly in the firelight. Horses, tethered just outside, stamp and snort, their presence steady and protective. Animals were not simply tools or property in this world. They were companions in survival, partners who shared the long nights of winter with their human families. It is well recorded that dogs lived within or very near the lodges, especially in colder seasons. They curled near the walls, sometimes slipping under the bottom edges of hides, where the warmth leaked out. Their dense coats absorbed the heat and gave it back, creating little islands of comfort around themselves. Children often gravitated to them, burrowing fingers into thick fur as they drifted to sleep. Dogs were not only guardians of the camp, but blankets with beating hearts. One curious anecdote comes from a Canadian trader who remembered laughing when he saw a child curled tightly around a large dog as though it were a pillow. The child slept so deeply that even the father joked he might trade his robe for the dog's warmth. The image lingers. Survival here was pragmatic, but also affectionate, built on bonds that blurred the line between human and animal. Scholars still disagree about whether dogs routinely slept inside the tipi or remained outside except in extreme cold. Some evidence suggests that only puppies or smaller dogs came in, while others claim entire packs found space near their human companions. Likely, the answer varied by tribe, by season, and by circumstance. But no matter where they slept, their warmth and watchfulness were integral to family life. The sensory presence of dogs in the lodge is unmistakable. You hear their soft panting blending with human breathing, smell the faint musk of fur mixed with smoke, feel the brush of a tail against your leg. At times they twitch in dreams, paws jerking as though chasing phantom prey. These sounds and sensations add layers to the night, constant reminders that vigilance never ceases. Horses, too, played their part, though in different ways. They usually remained tethered outside the circle of lodges, their sheer bulk forming a living wall against the storm. Imagine lying inside your tipi, hearing the steady crunch of hooves stamping snow, the low snort of a breath released into icy air. Even when you couldn't see them, their presence was comforting, like sentinels holding the line. Their bodies radiated heat that softened the wind immediately around them, a byproduct of life itself that warmed the camp. Travelers sometimes remarked with amazement at the closeness of this relationship. They expected horses to be treated purely as beasts of burden, but instead they saw them blanketed with robes, fed carefully, even allowed to huddle near fires on bitter nights. One soldier confessed that he was startled to see a man pat his horse on the neck, as if speaking to a brother before lying down to sleep. That intimacy, he realized, was not sentimentality. It was survival rooted in respect. The presence of animals also carried psychological weight. In the howling dark, when wolves cried across the prairie, people knew their dogs would raise the alarm first. The safety of sleep depended on those furry ears twitching at every sound. Horses, likewise, reacted to threats long before human senses stirred. A startled whinny in the night could bring warriors to alertness faster than any human whisper. To sleep surrounded by animals was to extend the range of your own senses, doubling or tripling the community's awareness. Imagine the soundscape now. Fire crackling, humans breathing, dogs shifting and whining softly, horses snorting outside. These rhythms interlock, blending into a chorus of shared life. The night is not empty. It is crowded with guardians, all woven into the fabric of survival. Even in dreams, you feel their presence, like extra layers of warmth laid upon your mind. One fur trader recounted a harsh winter night when temperatures plummeted so low that even his thick robe failed him. He claimed that, without hesitation, 2 dogs crept into his bedding, curling on either side. By morning, he admitted, he might not have lived without them. His tone carried awe, as if he had discovered some hidden truth. Companionship is warmth, whether it barks or speaks. Of course, the relationship wasn't purely tender. Dogs sometimes quarreled over scraps, barked restlessly, or jostled sleepers. Horses stamped and blew steam clouds into the lodge openings, rattling nerves. Yet these inconveniences were tolerated, even expected, because their benefits outweighed the trouble. Just as humans accepted smoke or weighty hides as the price of warmth, they accepted animal presence as part of the nightly balance. Anthropologists note that the closeness of animals in winter reinforced bonds of kinship across species. Children grew up not distinguishing sharply between family members and beloved dogs. They named them, spoke to them, relied on them. To wake with a dog's fur against your cheek was as normal as waking with a sibling beside you. That intimacy shaped outlooks, teaching respect and gratitude toward the living world. There is also something profoundly symbolic in sharing warmth with creatures. To press close to a dog or hear a horse breathing outside is to admit that survival is never solitary. Humans alone might not withstand the prairie, but humans with animals stood a chance. The tipi, then, was not just a human invention. It was a shared environment where every heartbeat, two-legged or four, contributed to the fragile flame of life through the coldest nights. So you lie here, and you feel the brush of fur at your side, hear the muffled stamp of hooves beyond the wall. The storm howls, but you are never alone. Around you, humans and animals form one community, one circle of warmth, one network of watchfulness. In that union, the cold is kept at bay, and you drift once more towards sleep, secure in the companionship of every breathing creature around you. The fire crackles low, and you pull the furs closer to your chin. For a moment, you notice a thin film of moisture glistening on the inside walls. Your breath, and the breath of everyone around you, has gathered as mist. In the deep cold of the prairie, that moisture could easily become frost, coating the hides in a crystalline shell. Left unchecked, it could melt by day and freeze again by night, turning the very shelter meant to save you into a dripping cave of ice. Yet the people who built and lived in Tipis knew how to master this invisible danger, balancing fire, airflow, and materials so condensation never overwhelmed them. Early descriptions by explorers record mornings when frost patterns decorated the inside of the lodge like lace, fragile and glimmering in dawn light. While beautiful, such frost was not harmless. Too much of it could dampen hides, weaken seams, or chill sleepers. But the builders had learned to manage it with subtle skill. The same smoke hole that carried out fumes also carried out excess moisture, as warm air rose steadily, drawing dampness upward. At the base, slight openings allowed cold, dry air to slip in and sweep moisture along. It was not perfect, but it was enough to keep the balance. One curious anecdote comes from a fur trader who woke during a blizzard to find the lodge sparkling with frost as though studded with diamonds. He remarked, half joking, that it was like sleeping inside a frozen palace. Yet he also noted that despite the glittering walls, he was warm beneath his robe, and the frost never melted enough to drip. The secret was airflow. Without it, the lodge would have grown soggy. With it, frost remained a thin decoration, harmless and even comforting in its beauty. Anthropologists remain divided on whether moisture management was intentional engineering or an accidental benefit of design. Some argue that the adjustable smoke flaps and slight gaps at the bottom were deliberately calculated to vent both smoke and dampness. Others suggest it was simply the natural result of hides being less airtight than canvas, allowing breath and steam to seep through. With evidence scarce, no agreement exists. But the effect was undeniable. People stayed dry enough to survive, season after season. Imagine the sensory experience. You open your eyes in the dim pre-dawn and see white frost tracing delicate lines across the sloping hides. Each exhale adds another puff of mist to the air, which drifts upward toward the smoke hole. When someone stirs the fire, the heat sends a ripple through the frost, softening it just enough to keep it from thickening. The walls glisten faintly, yet your bedding stays dry. It feels as if the tipi breathes, expelling moisture along with smoke, maintaining the fragile balance of comfort. Families also used simple tricks. Bedding was lifted onto mats or platforms so that dampness could not seep upward. Wet garments were hung higher on poles, closer to the rising heat, where they could dry overnight. Snow was brushed away from the lodge base, preventing meltwater from pooling at the edges. Every action was a small act of foresight, reducing the chance that sleep would be interrupted by icy drips. A little-known observation from a missionary's diary tells of children waking early to lick frost from the hides, treating it like candy. He was horrified, fearing sickness, but the children laughed, calling it sky sugar. Harmless in small amounts, this frost was simply part of their environment, familiar and unthreatening. It's a charming detail that transforms a threat into play, showing how resilience often carried humor alongside necessity. The rhythm of fire tending also helped. By banking coals instead of letting flames roar, families reduced steam from cooking or boiling. At night, when meals were finished, the lodge settled into a steadier balance, less smoke, less vapor, more stable warmth. Sleep became possible because every element of moisture was managed quietly, without fuss, woven into routine. Consider how different this was from the experience of settlers. Canvas tents often collected condensation until water dripped steadily on sleepers. Wooden cabins without ventilation grew damp, their interiors slick with moisture. Many newcomers complained of waking in clammy beds, blankets soaked. Meanwhile, inside tipis, the air remained dry enough that people could rest without fear of pneumonia. The difference was not luck, it was design tested over centuries. The sound of frost itself is subtle but real. On especially cold nights, you might hear faint crackles as ice crystals form on the hides, spreading like invisible handwriting across the surface. When firelight shifts, they sparkle briefly, turning the interior into a quiet constellation. Children must have stared, mesmerized, before drifting into dreams. For them, frost wasn't menace. It was part of the teepee's nightly performance, another character in the story of winter survival. Some researchers propose that hides themselves helped regulate moisture. Unlike canvas, which traps dampness, hides can absorb and release small amounts of vapor. When smoked during tanning, they become even more resistant to rot. In this sense, the very material of the teepee walls worked as a natural humidifier, smoothing extremes, preventing the buildup that could otherwise spell danger. Again, intentional or not, it was knowledge embodied in material culture. Picture now the feeling of waking on a bitter morning. You sit up, your breath visible in the cold air. The lodge walls shimmer with frost, but your bedding is dry, your body warm. You pull a robe around your shoulders, stir the fire, and listen as frost begins to crackle and drift downward in tiny flakes. It dusts your hair and shoulders, harmless as snow. You brush it away with a smile, knowing the system worked. The moisture that might have soaked you has been captured safely on the walls instead. Even the spiritual perspective touches moisture. Some traditions describe breath itself as sacred, the visible mist in winter a sign of life continuing. To see it rise into the smoke hole, joining the fire's own exhalation, was to witness a nightly offering. Frost on the walls, then, was not a nuisance but proof of the community's vitality. Every sparkle meant another sleeper had exhaled, another life persisted through the night. So you sink back into your furs, unbothered by the faint glitter overhead. You know the hides will breathe, the flaps will vent, the frost will stay where it belongs. Your bedding will remain dry, your body warm, your dreams uninterrupted. Outside, the world freezes solid. Inside, the teepee manages the fragile dance of air and water, turning what could be danger into beauty. And you, wrapped in that balance, drift easily towards sleep again. The storm has not eased. Snow drifts in waves across the prairie, piling against everything it touches. You might think this would be a disaster for the thin walls of a lodge. Yet inside the tipi, the air grows warmer, not colder, as snow heaps higher along its base. This was one of the great paradoxes of winter survival. The very substance that froze travelers to death in open country became, when handled wisely, another blanket pressed snug around the home. Travelers' journals confirm the practice. Families would deliberately pack snow around the bottom edge of the tipi, pressing it into ridges that sealed any gaps where drafts might slip in. Once hardened by wind and cold, these snowbanks formed a frozen skirt. The hides pressed firmly against them, creating an airtight barrier at ground level. No icy breeze could sneak through, and warmth stayed inside. What to outsiders looked like a buried tent was in fact a carefully engineered cocoon. One rather curious report comes from a soldier who stumbled upon a village after a heavy blizzard. At first, he believed the lodges had collapsed beneath the snow. Only when smoke curled out from the top vents did he realize they were still alive, their bases buried deliberately. He wrote, astonished that the snow became their ally, not their foe. His bewilderment reveals how differently he viewed the elements. To him, snow was only hazard. To them, it was resource. Archaeologists and historians still debate whether this snowbanking was systematic or opportunistic. Some argue it was a planned winter technique used across tribes, while others suggest it was improvised during especially fierce storms. Lacking direct documentation, scholars can only piece together fragments from oral accounts and explorers' notes. But regardless of intention, the effect is undeniable. Snow trapped heat, and heat meant life. Imagine the sensory reality inside such a lodge. The storm outside howls ferociously, snow driving sideways across the prairie. Yet you sit by the fire, listening to the muffled quiet that snow creates when it piles thick. The walls no longer rattle as sharply. The sound is softened, as if the tipi has sunk into silence. Your body registers the difference. The drafts that used to sneak at your ankles are gone. The floor feels steadier, warmer, more secure. The tipi has turned into a snow fortress, part hide, part ice, all shelter. Children must have found this magical. To them, it looked as though their home had grown roots into the earth, hugged tight by the snow. They pressed their fingers against the frozen wall, giggling at how solid it felt, then pulled back into the warmth of the firs. Parents reminded them not to dig too much snow-held heat, only so long as it stayed packed. Even play had to yield to survival's rules. A fur trader once remarked that he could always tell a seasoned winter camp from a novice one by the condition of the snowbanks. Where families packed them smooth and firm, the lodges glowed warmly within. Where snow was left jagged and loose, drafts crept in, and misery followed. He said, "Snow will keep you safe, but only if you treat it as friend, not enemy." His phrasing, unintentionally poetic, captured the truth. Think of the paradox on your own skin. Snowflakes bite sharply when they strike your face outside. They chill, they sting. But once gathered, compressed, and frozen, snow becomes an insulator, too dense to let air pass easily. That property was exploited here with intuitive brilliance. A family that once cursed the storm now welcomed its drifts, shoveling them into place with antler scoops or bare hands, reshaping the tipi's base until the cold itself had been recruited as a guardian. The sensory difference at night is extraordinary. You breathe more steadily, no longer tensing against sudden gusts. The fire burns lower, conserving fuel, because less heat escapes. The lodge feels more solid, its walls reinforced. Even the sounds change. Instead of constant rattling, you hear only the muted thump of snow settling. The tipi has become a muffled chamber, holding you in a bubble of warmth while the storm rages unseen. Some oral traditions even speak of snow as a protective spirit. Families believed that drifts piled against their lodges shielded them from more than cold. They blocked spirits of illness that rode the wind. Whether or not you share such beliefs, the symbolism is powerful. To be embraced by snow rather than assaulted by it changes fear into reassurance. The very element that kills travelers in open plains becomes guardian for those who know how to use it. Of course, dangers existed. Too much snow could collapse a lodge if not balanced carefully. Meltwater in early thaws might seep inside, soaking bedding. Families had to remain vigilant, breaking holes for drainage, clearing entrances as drifts piled high. Yet they accepted these chores, because the benefits outweighed the risks. Sleep through a blizzard was possible only when snow was tamed into structure. Picture yourself waking in the dead of night, curious about the storm's progress. You lift the flap slightly, and a wall of snow greets you, pressed firm against the hides. No wind rushes in, no icy sting touches your face. You close it again quickly, reassured. You lie back under your furs, marveling at the irony. You are warmer because snow itself guards the door. Some modern campers try to replicate this trick, banking snow around nylon tents. Yet they often fail, because their tents lack the breathability of hides. Condensation turns interiors wet, and warmth never holds. The tipi's design, its breathing walls, its vented top, its community knowledge made snow insulation work in ways modern gear still struggles to match. Imagine again the morning after. The storm has passed. You push aside the flap, stepping into the pale blue dawn. Around you, every lodge rises from the earth like a snow-crowned mountain, skirts pressed firmly into white drifts. Smoke still curls upward, evidence that fire burned all night, shielded by nature's own fortress. The village looks like a collection of glowing mounds, part human, part elemental. You realize that survival here has always been about alliance, not conquest using what the world offers, even its fiercest forces, to endure. So you return inside, grateful for the strange embrace of snow. You lie back down, listening to the quiet breathing of your family, the muffled hush of the world outside. The storm has spent its rage, but you are untouched, held by walls of hide, fire, fur, and now frozen water itself. You close your eyes once more, trusting that the prairie's coldest weapon has, for tonight, been turned into your ally. You turn under the hides and realize you never undressed. Your boots are beside you, yes, but everything else, the leggings, the tunic, the layers of fur and cloth remains on your body. Out here, sleeping bare, or even lightly dressed would be unthinkable. To survive a prairie night, people wore their clothing straight into bed, piling layer upon layer until their own bodies became part of the bedding. Contemporary accounts describe this plainly. Robes, shirts, leggings, even outer garments stayed on after the fire dimmed. Travelers noted with surprise that their hosts made no distinction between daywear and nightwear in winter. At first, outsiders found it uncomfortable, too warm, or too heavy. But after 1 or 2 nights in the piercing cold, they understood. The body itself was a furnace, and layers of clothing were the chimney walls that trapped its heat. One curious anecdote comes from a trader who scoffed at the practice and tried to sleep in his underclothes, reasoning he would be fresher in the morning. He nearly froze before dawn, waking shivering and miserable. The family laughed kindly, wrapping him in extra hides, and explained that the cold does not wait for you to be comfortable, it waits for you to be careless. He never made the same mistake again. Scholars continue to discuss whether wearing clothes to bed was simply convenience or an intentional survival strategy. Some suggest it was practical, less effort than undressing and redressing in sub-zero air. Others argue it was deliberate insulation, a way to trap every scrap of warmth. Either way, the practice was universal enough to appear in multiple accounts, and it worked. The sensory experience is vivid. Imagine layers pressing close against your skin, a soft inner shirt of tanned hide, leggings that hug tight, a heavy outer robe draped across shoulders. Over these come the communal furs. Your body heat builds, caught between each layer. It feels at first almost stifling, but gradually the warmth becomes steady, a cocoon you dare not disturb. Even the slight itch of wool or hide becomes part of comfort, a reminder that the cold cannot find you. Children were often dressed in extra garments before being tucked into their nests. Mothers wrapped them in robes while still awake, then piled furs over top. Infants swaddled in this way sometimes resembled small bundles of fur with only noses visible, steam rising from their breath like tiny chimneys. The care may have looked excessive to outsiders, but parents knew that one draft could mean illness or worse. Better to overdress than to risk exposure. One soldier wrote that he was astonished by the smell in a lodge after weeks of this practice, clothes rarely aired or washed in winter, steeped in smoke and sweat. Yet he admitted, grudgingly, that the warmth inside was worth the odor. People chose survival over comfort of scent, and over time, the smell itself became familiar, even reassuring. To many, it was the smell of life. There's also an efficiency here. To wake already dressed meant that when emergencies came, wolves prowling, storms rising, sudden migrations, you could move immediately. No time was lost fumbling with frozen garments. In a world where seconds sometimes mattered, sleeping clothed was not laziness but readiness. A little-known note from missionary records mentions that some families even slept with belts or sashes on, believing they kept the body's heat tied in. Whether scientifically true or not, the belief itself reveals how every element of dress was pressed into service against the cold. Clothing was not an accessory, it was armor carried into dreams. Think, too, of the psychological weight. To undress is to feel vulnerable, exposed. In the dead of winter, with wolves howling and wind shrieking outside, such exposure could be terrifying. To remain clothed was to remain secure, layered in both fabric and confidence. It let people surrender to sleep without fear that cold would creep in during the night. The tactile rhythm of the night carried this reality. You roll onto your side and feel leggings creak softly. A robe shifts against another robe, heavy but not suffocating. The warmth builds from every seam and fold, each layer trapping what your body would otherwise lose. Even if the fire dwindles, your clothing holds the line, fighting back against the night. Some anthropologists suggest this practice influenced cultural aesthetics. Clothing designs were not only for day display, but for night survival. Fringes, sashes, and layered robes functioned as much in bedding as they did in ceremony. The boundary between sleeping gear and daily wear blurred completely, reflecting a worldview where survival and identity merged seamlessly. Picture again the scene inside a tipi. Adults lie back still clad in leggings and shirts, wrapped in buffalo robes. Children, bundled like cocoons, nestle between them. Dogs curl nearby, their fur another layer. The fire glows faintly, but even if it falters, no one is naked to the cold. Everybody is armored, every layer a shield. Sleep is no gamble. It is prepared. One visiting explorer confessed that after several nights sleeping clothed in a lodge, he returned to his European-style bed and felt oddly vulnerable. To him, sheets and blankets without layered garments seemed fragile. He admitted he missed the weight of fur and fabric pressing down, missed the reassurance of being sealed tight against the world. He had learned what countless generations already knew. Warmth is not given, it is guarded. So you lie still now, feeling every garment pressed around you, every robe folded tight. Outside, frost creeps across the prairie. Inside, your body radiates like a coal, every layer catching its heat, refusing to let it slip away. You drift into dreams fully dressed, armored not against war but against the silent siege of winter. And you know deep down that you will wake alive because you never let your guard fall, not even in sleep. The night has passed, the fire stirs, and you blink awake as light spills through the flap. Outside, the snow still lies thick, but soon the camp will rise, the poles pulled down, the hides rolled, and the village on the move once again. For survival in the Great Plains, warmth did not come only from fire or hides or food. It also came from the wisdom of knowing when to leave and when to stay. Migration itself was a survival strategy, timed with the rhythms of the land and sky. It is well documented in explorers' accounts that tribes on the plains rarely stayed rooted in one place through the harshest stretches. They followed buffalo herds, yes, but they also shifted camp to avoid the most brutal winds or to settle near timbered valleys where fuel and shelter abounded. Mobility was part of their insulation, a way of escaping the worst cold by refusing to meet it head-on. Where settlers built cabins and endured, the nomadic peoples folded their homes onto horse travois and sought better ground. One curious anecdote comes from a US soldier who confessed surprise when he returned to a valley he'd seen occupied 1 month earlier, only to find it empty. The snow crisscrossed with sled marks leading south. He remarked that the lodges flee before the cold, like birds before frost. But this was not fleeing in panic. It was calculated strategy. By staying flexible, families conserved energy, found fuel, and avoided the fatal mistake of remaining in a place stripped bare by weather. Researchers continue to discuss whether these movements were primarily ecological, tracking buffalo and resources, or climatological, shifting to microclimates less brutal than the open plains. Some suggest both explanations intertwine. Food led families southward, but so did the promise of milder wind. With oral accounts blending practicality and spirituality, the answer remains layered. What is certain is that mobility was as essential as fire or fur. Imagine the sensory weight of migration. At dawn, women and men dismantled tipis swiftly, hides rolled into bundles, poles lashed together. Dogs and horses pull travois stacked high with bedding and supplies. The sound of jingling harnesses and creaking poles fills the frozen air. Children ride atop piles of hides, bundled tight, peering out at the glittering landscape. The camp shifts like a flock, fluid and determined, leaving behind only the faint circle of trodden snow where fires once burned. The rhythm of such movement meant families rarely exhausted any single area. Timber for fuel was never stripped bare, snowdrifts never turned into icy prisons. By staying mobile, people avoided the stagnation that killed many settlers who clung stubbornly to one place. The very design of the tipi, portable, collapsible, rebuildable, in an hour, was proof that survival here demanded motion. A little-known note from a fur trader recalls watching a village in motion on a winter morning. He marveled at the efficiency. Children bundled, dogs trotting, women leading horses, men scouting ahead. By midday, the group had resettled miles away. Fires lit anew, hides stretched back into shape. He admitted, almost in awe, that their mobility was as much a defense as any weapon. The cold could not pin them down, because they refused to be pinned. Consider the psychological comfort in this. To know that if a valley grew too exposed, you could leave. To know that survival wasn't about enduring the worst spot but finding the better one. This flexibility reduced fear. The cold was powerful, yes, but not absolute. With strong legs, willing horses, and knowledge of the land, you always had options. Children must have found excitement in these moves. The day began in one place and ended in another. The world constantly renewed. Each tipi was both home and caravan, both shelter and promise. The act of leaving behind yesterday's footprints reinforced the belief that life was movement, never stagnation. Sleep, too, carried this rhythm. You rested not in a permanent house, but in a portable cocoon that might be folded tomorrow. Some anthropologists argue that this mobility shaped worldview itself. To live in constant readiness to move meant valuing adaptability, resourcefulness, and lightness of possession. Wealth was not in what you could not carry. It was in the knowledge and strength to carry only what mattered. To wake each morning knowing your home might be packed within hours required resilience that settled communities often lacked. Picture yourself after a night in the snowbanked lodge. The fire is rekindled, a quick meal eaten, then the bustle begins. Poles thump as they're pulled free, hides flap as they're unpinned. The lodge that held you safe only hours before folds into a bundle on a horse's back. And yet, the security doesn't vanish, it travels with you, ready to be raised again wherever needed. Out on the trail, the soundscape shifts. Snow crunches beneath dozens of feet and hooves. Dogs bark, children chatter, sleigh poles creak. The cold air cuts your cheeks, but movement itself generates warmth. You pull your robe tighter, but your heart is lighter, knowing you are moving toward a place chosen for survival. The tipi will rise again before dusk. The fire rekindled, and another night passed in warmth. Even spirituality followed this rhythm. Some traditions saw migration as a mirror of the sun's own journey, always moving, never still. To move with the seasons was to walk in step with the world. Staying too long in one place was considered not only impractical, but unhealthy for body and spirit alike. Life was meant to flow, and the tipi embodied that flow. So when you lie down again that night, in a new valley or on a sheltered ridge, you are reminded that survival has always been a dance with the landscape. The cold does not defeat you because you do not challenge it head on. Instead, you sidestep, you flow, you move until the balance is restored. Sleep comes easier under such wisdom. You close your eyes, warmed not only by hides and fire, but by the knowledge that tomorrow, if needed, you can always rise and find another place to endure. The embers glow, steady and patient, and you realize the fire is more than heat. It is the heart of the lodge, the glowing center around which every action revolves. Without it, nights would be impossible. Yet to the people of the plains, the fire was not only practical, it was sacred. It represented continuity, connection, and the very spirit of life itself. When families lay down to sleep, they did not merely rest beside flames, they rested beside a presence. Accounts from explorers often remark on how carefully the hearth was treated. Stones arranged in circles were never scattered at random. They marked a center that was respected. The fire was fed deliberately, not tossed scraps without thought. Families positioned themselves around it in arcs, a circle within a circle, as though their lives revolved around its glow. In practical terms, it gave warmth, light, and safety. In spiritual terms, it was the axis that linked earth to sky. One evocative anecdote comes from a French trader who noted that before dawn, a woman sprinkled a pinch of food into the coals before serving breakfast. When he asked why, she explained it was an offering, sharing the meal with the fire so it would continue to protect them. He admitted he had never seen anyone feed flames as though they were kin, but the gesture left him unsettled, wondering if perhaps he had underestimated what fire meant. Researchers remain divided on whether every nightly act around the fire carried formal ritual meaning, or whether many actions were simply habit shaped by reverence. Some argue that every adjustment of wood, every whispered word, carried symbolic weight. Others suggest only certain moments, seasonal ceremonies, prayers were explicitly sacred. What is clear is that the line between ordinary and sacred blurred. In the tipi, survival and spirituality intertwined until no clear boundary remained. Imagine the sensory weight of sleeping beside a sacred flame. The glow paints your skin gold, flickers across the hides above, and warms your breath. You hear it crackle and pop, and each sound feels less like noise and more like a voice. The air smells of wood smoke and roasted meat, but also of something intangible: memory, reverence, continuity. As you drift into dreams, the fire remains, whispering in its own language, a lullaby older than human speech. Children learned early to respect it. They were told stories of spirits dwelling in flame, of ancestors carried upward in smoke. They grew up with rules: never spit into the fire, never play with its coals, never step across it without permission. These weren't simply warnings about safety. They were lessons in reverence. Fire was not mastered, it was partnered with. To share a night beside it was to share a night with the sacred. One curious detail surfaces in missionary records. Some families describe the smoke hole as the mouth of the lodge, the opening through which prayers and smoke alike rose to the heavens. When you watched sparks drift upward, you were not just seeing wood burn, you were watching your voice join the stars. The vent above became both chimney and altar, a constant reminder that survival was never separate from spirit. The psychological comfort this gave cannot be overstated. Imagine lying in the dark, wind shrieking outside, and knowing that the fire at your center is not just fuel but guardian. To believe it protects you in ways beyond heat shielding not only flesh but soul makes fear easier to bear. Faith and flame together weave a blanket no cold can pierce. Even the arrangement of sleeping reflected this reverence. The hearth occupied the literal center, and no one lay directly across it. Families curved around its perimeter, as though orbiting a Sunday. To fall asleep in such a circle was to embody order, unity, balance. The tipi itself became a microcosm of the universe. Fire at the center, smoke rising to the sky, sleepers forming the living circle of Earth. A traveler once described how, on winter nights, stories told around the fire seemed to draw life from the flames themselves. As a storyteller's voice rose, embers brightened, sparks leapt, shadows danced. The entire lodge seemed to listen, the fire an active participant. He admitted that when he finally fell asleep, he dreamed of the flames continuing to whisper long after the voices had faded. Some anthropologists suggest that seeing fire as sacred shaped discipline. Because it was honored, people tended it more carefully, ensuring it never died. That discipline had practical results. Embers banked properly, smoke vented, warmth sustained. In other words, reverence ensured survival. The spiritual lens reinforced the physical habit, and together they made nights safe. Picture yourself once more lying beneath firs, your face warmed by the glow. Outside, wolves howl, the prairie stretches endless and merciless. But inside, your world shrinks to this circle of light. Sparks rise through the vent like stars returning to their sky. The fire does not sleep, and so you can. You surrender to dreams, trusting that the heart of the lodge beats steadily, not only for warmth, but for meaning. When you finally close your eyes, you realize the fire is not just in the pit. It is in you, too, the warmth of your body, the rhythm of your breath, the glow behind your eyelids. You carry it forward into dreams, knowing that when you wake, it will still be there, waiting patiently, guardian and companion, both practical and sacred. The morning sun rises, and before long the lodge that kept you warm all night is coming apart. Poles tilt, hides fall, bedding is bundled, and suddenly the tipi that felt immovable only hours ago has collapsed into neat, portable pieces. It is a startling reminder. Warmth in the tipi was never a matter of permanence, but of ingenuity. Shelter here was designed to travel, to vanish and reappear, to fold into itself like a bird tucking wings before taking flight. It is well recorded that tipis could be dismantled in less than an hour and re-erected just as swiftly. Women who managed the construction knew every step by heart. They lashed poles together with precision, stretched hides taut, and positioned the smoke flaps exactly where they needed to be. Portability was survival. Families who depended on buffalo could not afford to remain rooted in one spot, so their homes mirrored their way of life: mobile, adaptable, efficient. A curious anecdote appears in the diary of a fur trader who claimed he once left camp to scout in the morning, only to return at midday and find the entire village gone. Not a single tipi remained standing. Yet by nightfall, he stumbled into the next valley and found the same village already glowing with firelight, the lodges rebuilt as though they had never moved. He admitted that such swiftness made him question his own culture's clumsy houses, nailed together but unable to flee. Historians still debate whether the portability of tipis was primarily driven by buffalo hunting cycles or by the demands of climate. Some argue the design was a direct adaptation to the herd's migrations, while others suggest it was equally crucial for escaping storms, floods, or exhausted firewood supplies. The disagreement underscores the multifaceted genius of the tipi. It met ecological, cultural, and survival needs simultaneously. Imagine the sensory experience of such portability. The poles, long and smooth, creak as they're lifted. Hides, heavy but flexible, fold with a leathery sigh. Children help by gathering ropes, laughing as they stumble through the snow with bundles larger than themselves. Dogs and horses wait nearby, ready to carry loads on travois wooden frames that dragged across snow or grass with ease. By the time midday sun climbs high, the village has transformed from a cluster of homes to a caravan in motion, leaving only rings of trampled ground behind. Inside the new camp, warmth returns almost instantly. Fires are lit in freshly built hearths, smoke curls into the evening air, and bedding is spread once again. You lie down under firs, amazed at how quickly permanence can be rebuilt from impermanence. The same walls that seemed eternal the night before are now stretched anew, as resilient as ever. One little-known detail preserved in missionary writings notes that poles often doubled as sled runners during migrations. Lashed together, they became the backbone of travois, carrying not just hides and furs but children, tools, and food. In this way, the very structure that formed the tipi by night also enabled movement by day. Shelter was not a static object, but a system, each part serving multiple purposes. The ingenuity extended further. By using hides stitched into semi-conical panels, families could add or remove sections depending on need. A small tipi suited 2 or 3 people. A larger one, with more panels, could house extended families. Flexibility meant efficiency. Fewer hides for travel, more for winter gatherings. Every detail was tuned for survival, for the endless rhythm of packing, moving, and rebuilding. Picture yourself lying under the hides that evening, marveling at the fact that this same fabric was fluttering on a travois only hours earlier. It still carries the faint smell of snow from the journey, still creases where it folded. Yet now it is a wall, holding back wind, reflecting firelight, sheltering you once again. To live in such a system is to embrace change as comfort. Home is not nailed to earth. It breathes, it travels, it bends with need. Some anthropologists argue that this constant rebuilding shaped worldview. To see your shelter collapse and rise again without fear teaches impermanence, not as threat, but as rhythm. Children who grew up watching lodges dismantled and raised hundreds of times understood instinctively that nothing fixed is eternal, yet nothing necessary is ever truly lost. Home was always waiting in the hides and poles, ready to be reborn wherever you chose. One explorer admitted that the mobility unsettled him. He wrote that he envied the ability to carry shelter across miles but also feared the lack of roots. Yet for the people who lived it, mobility was the root. Their belonging was not tied to a single place, but to the circle of family and the lodge itself. The tipi was both anchor and wing, grounding them each night and lifting them each morning. The sensory pattern of this rhythm is easy to imagine. Tonight you hear the fire crackle against hides that yesterday were folded into bundles. Tomorrow you may hear the same crackle against hides stretched in another valley. The warmth feels no less real for its impermanence. Instead, it feels more precious, a gift rebuilt daily through labor and skill. Even spirituality touched this mobility. Some traditions describe the tipi itself as a living being, one that walked with the people. Its poles the bones and its hides the skin. To dismantle it was not to destroy it, but to let it rest, carried gently across the land until it was ready to rise again. To sleep inside was to sleep in the embrace of a companion that traveled wherever you did, uncomplaining, patient, eternal through transformation. So tonight, as you curl beneath your layers, you think of the day's journey. You remember the poles across horses' backs, the hides rolling in the snow, the sound of laughter as camp took shape again, and you marvel at the fact that warmth is not chained to place, but to design. The tipi follows you, protects you, shelters you not because it is heavy or permanent, but because it is light, flexible, ingenious. You drift into sleep knowing that if tomorrow brings another journey, the same shelter will rise again, unchanged in purpose though remade in form. You lie back under the heavy robes, watching the fire glow faintly, and you realize something. Every detail around you has been placed with deliberate care. The mats beneath, the hides above, the position of the fire pit, the bundles stacked at the wall, all of it feels ordered, not random. This is no accident. Inside the tipi, women were the architects of warmth, the custodians of order, the quiet engineers who made survival not only possible but comfortable. Surviving records from explorers often note the speed and precision with which women raised or furnished a lodge. Within minutes of arrival at a new campsite, they could set poles, lash hides, and arrange interiors so that fire, bedding, and tools all had their rightful place. To outsiders it looked effortless. To those who depended on it, It was genius born of generations. Warmth was not only in hides and fire, but in the unseen touch of women's hands shaping the environment. One curious anecdote comes from a trader who tried to rearrange bedding to suit his own taste. He placed his furs closer to the entrance, thinking he would catch fresh air. The women of the household smiled politely, said nothing, and quietly moved his bedding back when he was out fetching water. That night, as winds rattled the flap, he realized they had saved him from freezing. He admitted in his journal that he had learned not to doubt the wisdom of those who order the lodge. Scholars still discuss whether the division of labor in tipi life was rigid or flexible. Some argue women exclusively controlled the interior, while men concerned themselves with hunting and external defense. Others point to oral traditions showing more overlap, but consensus agrees on one thing: women's expertise in creating comfort was profound. Their work transformed raw hides and poles into homes that cradled entire families through the worst nights. Imagine the sensory choreography. A woman smooths a mat of reeds across the floor, pressing it tight against the base of the wall to block drafts. She layers a buffalo robe with the fur turned inward, then another with the fur turned outward to resist dampness. She checks the smoke flaps, adjusting them with poles until the draft pulls upward cleanly, carrying smoke without stealing too much heat. Her motions are practiced, quick, unerring. By the time the fire burns low, the space has become more than a tent. It has become sanctuary. Children watched and learned from these gestures. They saw how their mothers and grandmothers tucked edges of hides under mats to keep them from curling, how they positioned tools and baskets to act as barriers against drafts. These lessons, absorbed wordlessly, became habits passed down generation after generation. Knowledge of comfort was as carefully inherited as knowledge of hunting or warfare. One little-known note from a missionary's diary reveals his astonishment at how women managed even the smallest details. He wrote that stones used for the hearth were chosen not just for size, but for how they held heat, and women replaced them regularly when cracks weakened their strength. "They do not merely burn wood," he admitted. "They burn with wisdom." His grudging respect underscores how easy it was for outsiders to overlook the sophistication behind what looked simple. The layout of sleeping also reflected women's choices. Families were placed in arcs, with elders in the warmest spots, infants wrapped securely near their mothers, and younger children tucked between. Visitors and guests were positioned where smoke would be lightest but drafts strongest, a balance between hospitality and practicality. The circle was not random, it was mapped carefully, guided by experience of who needed warmth most and who could withstand the chill. The tactile result is obvious. You press your palm against the bedding beneath you and feel it layered smooth, no cold soil seeping through. You turn, and the robe covers you fully, no gaps where air can slip in. Every fold, every tuck, every placement has been thought of. You realize the comfort you enjoy is not just luck. It is the outcome of skill invisible in the dark, but undeniable in the body's ease. Anthropologists suggest that women's central role in arranging interiors also gave them quiet authority. Control of warmth was control of survival. To manage where the fire sat, how the flaps opened, how the bedding lay, was to shape the line between life and death in winter. Their work was not visible in warfare or hunting, but it was no less vital. Each night, their hands secured the boundary between comfort and catastrophe. A traveler once confessed that he had underestimated this. He saw men hunt buffalo and thought only of their courage. But after sharing weeks in lodges, he admitted that without the order women created, the hunt's spoils would be wasted. Meat would rot, hides would stiffen, fires would choke with smoke. The men bring home the body of survival, he wrote, but the women breathe its life. There is spiritual resonance here as well. In some traditions, the interior of the lodge was considered an extension of the woman's body, a womb-like shelter cradling the family. The fire was the heart, the walls, the skin, the circle of sleepers the children gathered within. Whether symbolic or simply practical, The connection reinforced respect for the feminine role in sustaining warmth. To lie in the lodge was to lie in the embrace of mothers past and present. Picture the nightly scene again. The wind screams outside, wolves cry in the distance, and snow piles against the walls. Inside, you lie warm, safe, and ordered not because chance decreed it, but because women shaped every detail. They thought of drafts you never noticed, tucked corners you never saw, positioned you where warmth would linger longest. Their expertise was not loud, not celebrated in songs of battle, but it was the steady heartbeat of survival. So you drift into sleep once more, aware that the comfort you feel is built by countless unseen gestures. The tipi is more than poles and hides. It is a system tended, arranged, and perfected by women whose knowledge turned raw materials into refuge. You rest in their design, protected not only by fur and fire, but by the wisdom of hands that worked quietly, tirelessly, so that night after night families could dream instead of shiver. The fire has settled to a low glow, and you shift under your furs, ears tuning not just to the breathing in your own lodge, but to the wider symphony outside. A tipi village at night is not silent. It is alive, breathing collectively through dozens of small openings, its sounds carrying like whispers across snow. To sleep here is to be part of a larger organism, where every lodge contributes to the rhythm of survival. It is well recorded in explorers' notes that the nights of a winter camp carried distinctive layers of sound. Dogs barked intermittently, sometimes in quick bursts, sometimes in long, mournful howls. Horses stamped their hooves against the cold ground, snorting steam into the air. From within lodges came the muffled cadence of voices telling stories, the crackle of fires being stirred, and the steady sigh of wind pressing against hides. Outsiders remarked on how these sounds never ceased completely but ebbed and flowed, a living soundtrack of resilience. One particularly curious anecdote survives from a fur trader who wrote that he once awoke convinced he was hearing music drifting across the frozen prairie. When he rose to investigate, he realized it was the overlapping tones of women humming lullabies to children in separate lodges. Each melody on its own was soft, almost inaudible, but together they formed a woven chorus that carried faintly through the night. It was as if the camp itself sang, he marveled. That image lingers the idea that warmth came not only from fire, but from music shared across walls of hide. Researchers still discuss whether villages deliberately coordinated such rhythms, whether fires were banked in unison, whether stories ended at the same time, whether silences were intentional. Some argue it was coincidence, the natural result of human routines aligning. Others suggest an unconscious choreography, a cultural sense of harmony that guided even nightly habits. There is no definitive answer, but the impression remains that these camps felt ordered, as if each tipi knew its role in the larger circle. Imagine the sensory world of stepping briefly outside at midnight. The snow crunches sharply beneath your moccasins. Frost bites your nose, yet the air is filled with warmth of sound. From one lodge, laughter bursts and quickly dies. From another, a baby cries and is hushed. Dogs circle, their paws leaving prints in the powder. Above, smoke columns curl faintly, backlit by stars. You realize you are walking through a village that breathes together, every lodge pulsing with life despite the cold. Children must have carried these memories deep into adulthood. For them, falling asleep meant hearing not just their parents' voices, but the faint chorus of an entire community. To know that beyond the walls others were awake, tending fires, telling stories, watching over horses, this created a safety net wider than any one lodge. Sleep was communal, even when it was private. One missionary wrote, almost enviously, that the people never seem alone, even in dreams. He compared it with the isolation of settler cabins, each family cut off in silence, fearing the night. He admitted that while he found the constant murmur of camp distracting at first, he later felt oddly lonely without it. The difference between solitude and shared existence was etched in sound. The smell of the village was just as distinctive. Smoke from dozens of fires mingled in the air, carrying the tang of different fuels, wood, buffalo dung, willow bark. The scent clung to hair, hides, even snow, so that the camp carried its aroma with it wherever it went. Outsiders often found it pungent, even overwhelming. But for those within, it was the perfume of safety, the olfactory proof that fires burned everywhere, warmth alive in every direction. To drift into dreams while breathing smoke-laced air was to be reminded constantly that you were not alone. Dogs provided their own layer of sensory presence. Their howls rose in response to distant wolves, their barks echoed across the ring. Yet these sounds reassured more than they disturbed. Every bark meant vigilance, every growl meant protection. To hear them was to know the perimeter was guarded, the night's dangers kept at bay. Horses, too, contributed. Their stamping and whinnying punctuated the quiet, reminders of strength waiting for dawn. Even silence itself carried meaning. Between bursts of sound, there were stretches when the whole camp seemed hushed, the snow muffling everything. In those moments, the faint crackle of your own fire seemed amplified, every breath loud in your ears. Silence was not emptiness but pause, the heartbeat between movements of a symphony. Children likely drifted into the deepest sleep during these lulls, their dreams shaped by the rhythm of sound and quiet. The visual image of the camp at night was breathtaking. From a distance, a ring of lodges glowed faintly, smoke rising in threads, sparks drifting upward like stars returning to the sky. The circle of warmth in the vast frozen prairie must have seemed miraculous, a cluster of life defying death's grip. For those inside, the glow of neighbors' fires seeping through hides was a comfort. Even with eyes closed, they knew others nearby were awake, alive, enduring the same night. One trader confessed that he once stepped outside during a storm and wept. He had expected to feel terror in the face of blinding snow, but instead he saw the camp glowing like a necklace of embers strung across the white. The sight filled him with awe, convincing him that no single lodge could ever capture the full power of community. Warmth radiated not from one fire, but from the circle, the collective pulse of dozens burning together. Anthropologists suggest these nightly atmospheres shaped identity. To grow up hearing the overlapping sounds of dogs, fires, voices, and wind was to learn that survival was never solitary. The body carried those rhythms forward, imprinting community into memory. Even in old age, elders spoke of the music of camp nights, as though it were a song that never fully left them. So you lie back now, under your hides, listening not only to your own fire but to the layered chorus beyond. The wind still howls, but it cannot erase the murmurs, the barks, the laughter, the crackle. The village breathes, and you breathe with it. You close your eyes, comforted not just by your bedding and fire, but by the invisible net of sound that ties you to everyone else. In that symphony of night, you surrender to dreams, secure in the harmony of community. The fire in the center of the lodge glows again, its coals stirred with care, and you notice something unusual. The flames do not smell like pine or oak. Instead, the smoke carries a sharper, earthier note, less woody, more subtle. You lean closer, realizing the fire has been fed not with timber but with dried buffalo dung. Out here on the vast prairie, where tall trees were scarce, families turned to what the land provided most abundantly. Survival required burning whatever could hold a flame, and resourcefulness was as essential as the fire itself. Explorers and traders frequently remarked on this practice. They described neat stacks of dried dung, often called buffalo chips, piled outside lodges, ready for use. Far from being a sign of poverty, these fuel stores represented foresight and ingenuity. Chips collected during warm months were dried in the sun, light and easy to carry, then stacked like treasure against the coming winter. In regions where trees grew sparse, these humble discs became the lifeblood of the camp. One curious anecdote appears in the notes of a missionary, who confessed he was surprised to find meals cooked over buffalo chips tasted no different than those prepared over wood. At first he recoiled from the idea. But after several weeks of eating stews and roasted meat prepared this way, he admitted the fuel burned cleanly, producing little ash and steady heat. His disgust turned to admiration, though he admitted it took swallowing both food and pride to reach that conclusion. Scholars continue to debate whether buffalo chips were a preferred fuel or a last resort. Some evidence suggests they were used regularly, prized for their even burn and low smoke. Others argue they were fallback material when wood was unavailable. With camps spread across such diverse environments, both may be true. But what is certain is that families who mastered this resource gained freedom from dependence on scarce timber. The sensory details of burning dung are distinctive. The smell is faint, earthy, less acrid than one might imagine. The fire burns steady, producing coals that glow like jewels, their heat long-lasting. Food cooked above them takes on a gentle smokiness, not unpleasant, more subtle than hardwood flames. To lie beside such a fire at night is to feel a steady, even warmth radiating outward, dependable through the hours of darkness. Wood was used when available, of course. Cottonwood along rivers, willow near wetlands, or driftwood found on plains were gathered and cherished. Families cut and stacked it carefully, rationing each stick through the season. Where wood grew plentiful, fires blazed larger, offering brighter light and thicker smoke. Where wood was scarce, flames burned lower, fed by chips that crackled softly. The result was always the same: warmth preserved, no matter the fuel. A little-known note from a soldier's journal recalls how children helped collect fuel. They wandered the prairie in summer, baskets slung on their backs, gathering dung where buffalo herds had passed. He observed that they laughed and competed, turning what outsiders saw as drudgery into a game. By the time snow fell, those children's playful labor had become the foundation of survival. The irony struck him deeply. Life itself often depended on chores so simple, yet so misunderstood by outsiders. Inside the lodge, the choice of fuel shaped the night. Wood fires produced more crackle, more shifting shadows, more scent. Chip fires produced steadier heat, with less drama but greater endurance. Families often banked chips beneath logs, letting both fuel types work together. The science was intuitive: quick heat from wood, long burn from dung. This layering mirrored the way they layered hides and clothing, each material serving a role, none wasted. Imagine the soundscape of such a fire. Logs pop sharply, sparks leaping into the smoke hole. Chips hiss softly, glowing red without noise. Together they create a rhythm, loud and quiet, bright and dim. You lie beside it, watching embers pulse, breathing in the mixed aroma of smoke and earth. The tipi itself becomes an alchemy of elements: wood, dung, hide, stone, all conspiring to turn winter into something bearable. Anthropologists suggest that reliance on buffalo chips symbolized deeper ties to the animal. Buffalo already provided meat, hides, bones for tools, sinew for thread. Now even their droppings fueled life, literally keeping families warm through the night. This completeness of use embodied respect: nothing wasted, everything honored. To sleep by a dung fire was not indignity, it was gratitude, a reminder of the buffalo's total gift. Some outsiders mocked the practice, sneering at the idea of burning waste, yet many later confessed envy, realizing that their own supply of chopped wood dwindled faster than expected. When storms cut off access to timber, they shivered in their cabins, while the teepee villages still glowed. Resourcefulness outlasted prejudice. Picture yourself lying back, firelight dancing across the hides above. You hear the muffled hiss of chips, see the glow steady and unwavering. You realize you are breathing easier, less smoke irritates your eyes, less soot clings to the walls. The fuel is humble, yes, but its gift is profound. It lasts, it sustains, it endures. Sleep comes easier knowing the fire will not die too quickly. Even spiritually, fuel carried meaning. Some traditions describe dung as a humble yet sacred offering, proof that even the least glamorous parts of life held power. To burn chips was to accept the world's totality, finding warmth even in what others rejected. That acceptance shaped outlook, reinforcing resilience. So as you drift towards sleep once more, you understand that the fire is not choosy. It burns what is given, whether wood, willow, or buffalo chip, and in return it offers the same gift: warmth, light, safety. You close your eyes, knowing survival here depends not on pride but on humility, on using everything, on seeing value where others see waste. In that wisdom lies the secret to making it through another winter's night. You cough lightly, and a small plume of smoke curls into your face before drifting upward toward the vent. For a moment, the air seems hazy, thick with the mingled breath of fire and sleepers. Then, with a gentle shift, the current carries it out, vanishing into the night. You realize the tipi is alive not only with warmth but with breath itself, air entering low, rising high, flowing constantly. Without this circulation, the shelter would suffocate its own people. Instead, it breathes with them, an ingenious balance of smoke and wind. Historical descriptions of tipis almost always mention the smoke hole. Unlike canvas tents or wooden cabins, which trapped smoke until lungs burned, the tipi offered an adjustable system of flaps at the peak. By moving poles from inside, families angled the flaps against or with the wind, controlling how smoke escaped. The result was not perfection. Smoke sometimes lingered, but enough to keep the lodge breathable. Survival wasn't only warmth, it was air. One curious anecdote comes from a fur company clerk who confessed he spent his first night in a lodge coughing miserably. He blamed poor design, until a woman adjusted the flaps the next morning. Suddenly, smoke drew upward in a clean column, and the air cleared. He admitted in his journal that he had thought myself smarter than the wind, but the people here know its moods better than I ever shall. His humility captures the art behind what outsiders dismissed as crude. Researchers still argue over how precise this system was. Some believe the flaps functioned almost like sails, catching air currents to pull smoke out efficiently. Others claim the hides themselves, porous by nature, allowed enough seepage that perfect venting wasn't necessary. Evidence supports both. But all agree the teepee's design avoided the choking smoke that plagued European-style cabins in similar conditions. Families could eat, talk, and sleep without constant tears in their eyes. Imagine the sensory experience of that airflow. Cold air slips quietly beneath the lodge edges, drawn inward by the fire's hunger. It brushes your ankles at first, sharp, biting, but then is transformed, warmed as it passes the flames. By the time it rises to your chest, it carries heat, not chill. You breathe it in, filling your lungs with air both fresh and warm. Above, smoke trails upward, drawn toward the vent like a prayer lifted to the sky. The adjustments were constant. Someone woke in the night, noticed smoke thickening, and rose to shift a pole. The flaps creaked, the wind caught, and suddenly the draft changed. Children barely stirred, soothed by the rhythm of caretakers working silently in the dark. Sleep was communal labor. No one lay idle if smoke grew heavy. Small corrections, minute gestures with poles, meant the difference between comfort and choking. One little-known note from an explorer mentions that some families decorated the poles used to adjust flaps, carving or painting them. He speculated this might reflect the importance of the task. These poles were not mere sticks but tools of survival, wielded nightly. They symbolized control over the invisible wind, smoke, air. To move them was to guide unseen currents, shaping the very breath of the household. The smell of smoke still lingered, of course. Hides absorbed it, hair reeked of it, clothing carried it. Outsiders often complained bitterly, but for those inside, the scent became comfort, even identity. To breathe smoke-laced air was to know you belonged, that fire burned steadily, that warmth was alive. The very smell that outsiders loathed was, for insiders, reassurance itself. Children grew up with lungs accustomed to this environment. They learned early how to sit where smoke was thinnest, how to wave a hand to redirect it briefly, how to listen for the shift when a draft cleared the air. Smoke wasn't an intrusion, it was a companion, another voice in the nightly chorus. There is also symbolism here. Some traditions described smoke as carrying prayers upward, the vent as a pathway to the heavens. Sparks rising into the night were seen as messages, the breath of the people joining with the breath of the world. To lie in a smoky lodge was not indignity, but communion. The air you exhaled, the smoke, the fire exhaled, all of it mingled, rose, and departed together. Picture now the scene in the quietest hours before dawn. Embers glow red, air drifts gently, smoke curls upward. You shift under your furs, inhale, exhale, and realize the teepee itself is breathing with you. Its hides swell slightly in the wind, its flaps move softly, its draft cycles endlessly. You are not just in a shelter, you are inside a lung, a living organ made of wood and hide and air. A soldier once confessed that after weeks in cabins with stinging eyes, he felt relief sleeping in a lodge, even with its quirks. "The house I built smoked me half to death," he wrote, "but their lodge seemed to know when to exhale." He was baffled, but the truth was simple. Centuries of refinement had shaped a system attuned to wind and flame. Survival was not brute force, it was finesse. The tactile presence of airflow could be felt even in dreams. Cold brushed your toes but never lingered. Warmth washed your chest. Breath felt lighter, easier, steadier. These rhythms lulled you into sleep, each inhale tied to the fire, each exhale carried upward in the smoke's drift. To live in such balance was to feel part of something larger, something that used wind itself as ally rather than enemy. So you turn now, eyes half closed, the smoke clearing once more. You listen to the faint flap of hides shifting above, the fire sighing as it exhales. You feel the draft swirl across your face, not choking but soothing. The tipi breathes, and so do you. You drift towards sleep, wrapped not only in hides and warmth but in the subtle genius of airflow, the invisible art that turned a simple lodge into a sanctuary of breath. You stir beneath your robe, roll onto your side, and notice the bedding smells faintly of smoke and hide, touched with the musk of grass mats beneath. Everything here has been laid down, layered, and maintained with care. The comfort you feel tonight is not chance, it is the result of constant attention, of rituals that kept bedding clean, dry, and alive with warmth. In a world where snow crept under hides and dampness could be deadly, families treated bedding as sacred as fire itself. Explorers who stayed in lodges often remarked on the surprising freshness of sleeping places. They expected dirt floors, filthy hides, and sour smells. Instead, they found carefully arranged mats of reeds, grasses, or willow, changed and replaced when they grew worn. Women shook out furs each morning, hung them to air in the daylight, and beat dust from them with sticks. Even in winter, when snow crusted the world outside, bedding was turned and rotated to keep it from molding. Cleanliness was survival, and diligence made nights bearable. One curious anecdote appears in a trader's memoir. He confessed that he assumed buffalo robes would stink beyond tolerance, but he discovered instead that the constant exposure to smoke actually preserved them. The robes smelled heavily of fire, yes, but not of rot. Smoke infused fibers with a scent that repelled pests and slowed decay. "The fire does not only warm them," he wrote, "it seasons them like meat." His metaphor may sound odd, but it captures the truth. Smoke itself was part of bedding maintenance, a preservative woven into every night's rest. Historians still debate how often bedding was fully replaced. Some suggest hides and mats lasted through many winters, patched and repaired when torn. Others argue that bedding was cyclical, with new hides added each hunting season and old ones discarded. Whatever the case, families clearly monitored their bedding closely. Dampness could kill faster than hunger, and so vigilance was constant. Imagine the sensory experience of a bedding rotation. At dawn, Women and children lift robes and mats, carrying them outside into the weak sunlight. Frost clings to edges, glinting like silver. They shake them hard, snow flying off in white bursts, then spread them across poles to air. The hides crackle as they stiffen in cold, but soon they will be softened again by fire's warmth inside. Children laugh, tossing snow at one another, but the work itself is serious. Bedding cannot be neglected. The night's comfort depends on today's effort. Guests were often astonished by how carefully bedding was arranged within the circle of sleepers. Furs were overlapped, so no seam let drafts through. Edges were tucked beneath mats, forming barriers against creeping cold. Infants were swaddled in the softest furs, rabbit or beaver, while older children shared heavier buffalo hides. Adults lay in arcs, their robes overlapping slightly with their neighbors, sharing warmth even between separate beds. Nothing was haphazard. Each fold, each tuck, was chosen with purpose. A little-known observation from a missionary reveals another detail. Sometimes, herbs were scattered in bedding to repel insects or to freshen the smell. He described the faint aroma of sage or sweetgrass lingering in hides, mixing with the ever-present smoke. For him, the scent was unfamiliar but strangely soothing. For the families inside, it was both practical and symbolic. Plants carried protective power, warding off pests and perhaps even nightmares. Think of the tactile sensation of lying on such bedding. The mats beneath are springy, yielding just enough to cushion hips and shoulders. Above them, furs envelop you, rough on one side, velvety on the other. The edges are tucked snug, sealing you in a pocket of warmth. Your body heat builds, trapped by layers, and soon you feel the difference. No dampness, no drafts, only steady warmth pressing against your skin. Anthropologists suggest that bedding practices taught children lessons about discipline. They grew up knowing to fold robes carefully, to shake mats, to air hides when the sun allowed. These tasks were small, repetitive, but essential. Neglect meant discomfort or illness. Care meant survival. In this way, the very act of preparing to sleep became a moral lesson. Respect the details, and the details will protect you. One trader recalled that bedding inside a lodge reminded him of nests. He described how each sleeper's space curved inward, piled with robes and mats, cozy and deliberate. The comparison is apt. Like birds weaving twigs and feathers, families built their sleeping spaces with whatever the land gave them, turning raw material into comfort. And just as a nest must be maintained daily, so too must bedding in the tipi. The smell of bedding at night carried layers of meaning. Smoke, fur, dried grass, faint herbs, and human musk all mingled. Outsiders found it overwhelming, but insiders found it reassuring. It was the smell of continuity, of countless nights survived. To bury your face in a robe and breathe deeply was to inhale history, labor, and love all at once. Picture again the nightly routine. After supper, bedding is unrolled and laid out. Women smooth edges, tuck corners, and adjust mats. Children crawl into their nests, giggling, then fall silent as warmth overtakes them. Adults lie down last, ensuring everything is ready. The lodge grows quiet, only the fire crackling. You sink into bedding that has been shaped by countless hands, warmed by countless fires, preserved by countless mornings of care. Even spirituality touched this practice. Some traditions described bedding as a microcosm of the earth. Mats of grass, the soil, hides the surface, robes the living world above. To lie upon them was to return to the embrace of the land, to be held by it in sleep. Maintenance, then, was not just practical but reverent. Each morning's airing was a way of honoring the earth's gift, each evening's folding a way of preparing to enter its embrace once more. So you curl onto your side, smelling the smoke in your robe, feeling the spring of mats beneath, hearing the fire sigh. You know the bedding has been cleaned, shaken, arranged. You know tomorrow it will be aired again. Comfort does not happen by accident. It is built, renewed daily, cared for with diligence. You drift into sleep, secure not only in warmth, but in the assurance that countless careful hands have made this rest possible. The fire has dwindled to faint embers, shadows pulse against the hides, and your eyelids grow heavy. Sleep is near, but here, in the circle of a tipi, slumber is never only rest. It is a passage, a threshold into other worlds. For the people of the plains, dreams were not dismissed as idle illusions. They were teachers, messengers, sometimes even warnings. To close your eyes inside the lodge was to enter not only warmth, but vision, to join a tradition where the night's images carried weight beyond the morning. Ethnographers who recorded oral histories describe how dreams were often shared aloud at dawn. Elders explained them, sometimes interpreting symbols, sometimes listening silently as children or adults recounted strange journeys. The tipi became both cradle and cathedral, a place where bodies slept but spirits traveled. Sleep was practical, yes, but it was also spiritual practice, another dimension of survival woven into nightly routine. One evocative anecdote comes from a trader who awoke to hear a man telling his family about a dream of buffalo flooding across a valley. The next week, a herd appeared there, exactly as he had described. The trader admitted he did not know whether coincidence or prophecy, but the family treated the dream as guidance, shaping their hunting plans around it. For them, the dream's truth was unquestionable. To ignore it would have been folly. Scholars remain divided over how literally such dreams were taken. Some argue they served as metaphor, teaching lessons through imagery rather than predicting events. Others insist that visions were trusted as genuine prophecy. The debate remains unresolved, but the significance is clear. Sleep carried meaning, and no one dismissed the whispers of the night. Imagine the sensory atmosphere of drifting into such a dream. The fire glows faintly, red light shimmering through smoke. The breathing of your family surrounds you, steady as ocean waves. Outside, the wind howls, rattling hides, but inside, warmth cocoons you. As your eyes close, images rise. A river flowing uphill, a buffalo with human eyes, a hawk speaking in a voice you know. These visions feel as real as the furs beneath your cheek. You accept them because here the line between waking and dreaming is thin. Children, too, were taught to pay attention. A boy who dreamed of an animal might be told that creature had chosen him, offering power or guidance. A girl who dreamed of fire might be reminded to respect the hearth, to see warmth as living. Dreams became part of education, subtle lessons woven into daily survival. A single night's vision could shape a lifetime's choices. One curious detail surfaces in missionary writings. He noted with frustration that children laughed about his own dreams when he recounted them, saying they carried no meaning because he had no ties to their spirits. To them, dreams were not universal but relational. They belonged to those who shared kinship with the land and its beings. Outsiders were dreamless, even if they dreamed. His irritation only highlights the divide. For the people in the lodge, dreams were currency. For him, they were nonsense. The psychological comfort of believing in dreams was immense. Imagine enduring months of brutal cold, endless storms, scarce food. Hope could fade quickly. Yet a dream of plenty, of safety, of ancestors smiling, could carry a family through despair. Dreams offered more than guidance, they offered endurance, giving people reasons to rise each morning with courage. Some anthropologists suggest that the very conditions of tipi sleep fostered vivid dreams. The flickering firelight behind closed eyelids, the rhythmic sound of wind and breathing, the mingling of smoke and scent, all these stimuli blurred boundaries of consciousness. Sleep became liminal, neither fully detached nor fully awake. The mind drifted easily into imagery, and the culture gave those images weight. Picture again a morning after such a night. Dawn filters through the east-facing flap, golden light spilling across mats. Embers still glow faintly. Children rub their eyes, adults stretch, and then someone begins recounting their dream. The family listens, nodding, sometimes laughing, sometimes solemn. The dream is treated as real, its lessons folded into the day. What happened in sleep belongs to everyone, shared like fire, food, and warmth. One elder once told an ethnographer, "The dream is also fire. It warms you when the night is long." The metaphor is striking. Just as embers glow through darkness, so do visions. Both keep the heart alive. To dismiss dreams would be like letting the fire die, an act of negligence that risked more than comfort. The sensory quality of dream sharing is intimate. Voices are low, almost whispers. Smoke curls lazily above. The smell of last night's stew lingers faintly. Faces glow in morning light, and words carry images from one mind to many. You hear of hawks, rivers, buffalo, ancestors, and though you did not see them yourself, you feel their weight. Sleep was never solitary. It was communal, just as waking was. Even skepticism existed. Not every dream was accepted blindly. Families debated, teased, questioned. Some dreams were dismissed as nonsense, products of overeating or exhaustion. Yet even that debate reinforced meaning. By questioning, by interpreting, people acknowledged that dreams mattered. Dismissal was still engagement, proof that visions were woven into the fabric of life. So you close your eyes again, drifting once more into the liminal space between breath and vision. The tipi sways in the wind, fire pulses faintly, and you feel the boundary dissolve. The dream awaits, carrying you where daylight cannot. Whether message, metaphor, or mystery, it warms you nonetheless. And in that warmth, you sleep, not only surviving the night but gathering guidance for tomorrow. You shift in your bedding, half asleep, and a sound cuts through the muffled breathing of the lodge. A low growl outside, followed by the sharp bark of dogs. The camp stirs. Survival in winter meant more than warmth. It meant vigilance, even in the darkest hours. Wolves prowled, sometimes daring to approach camp. Rival bands or raiders might test defenses under cover of storm. To sleep in a tipi was to rest, yes, but also to be ready. Nights were safe only because the people inside never surrendered fully to slumber. Historical records speak often of this watchfulness. Men slept near their weapons, bows within arm's reach, lances propped against the poles, knives tucked into belts. Horses were tethered close, guarded fiercely, for they were both wealth and lifeline. Dogs, ever restless, were the first alarm system, their ears keener than any human's. When they barked sharply, adults rose instantly, eyes scanning shadows. A village of tipis was not defenseless, even at midnight. It breathed in rhythm with the dangers that circled it. One vivid anecdote comes from a trader who was startled awake when every dog in a camp erupted in furious barking. He admitted his first instinct was to panic. Certain raiders had come. Instead, when he looked outside, he saw wolves circling, yellow eyes flashing in the firelight. Men rose calmly, driving them off with shouts and flaming sticks. Within minutes, the camp settled again. They treated it like swatting flies, he wrote, marveling at their composure. For him, danger was extraordinary. For them, it was routine. Scholars still debate whether people truly slept deeply in winter camps, or whether slumber was lighter, broken into cycles of watchfulness. Some anthropologists suggest families rotated alertness, with someone always half awake to tend fire and guard. Others argue that the layered protection dogs, horses, neighbors, made deep rest possible. With oral traditions silent on the detail, no certainty exists. What is clear is that sleep was shaped by readiness, not naive trust. Imagine the sensory feel of this readiness. You lie warm, but one hand rests on the shaft of a lance. Your ears are tuned, even in dreams, to the change in dogs' voices. A playful bark is ignored, but a growl or a frantic yelp snaps you awake instantly. Your heart pounds, adrenaline replacing drowsiness in a breath. Within seconds, you are standing, robe thrown around shoulders, scanning the dark. This rhythm repeats across thousands of nights, shaping the instincts of an entire people. Children learned it too. They woke to their parents' swift movements, felt the tension in the air, and soon understood that even inside the lodge, safety was not absolute. Fear was balanced by trust, however, for they also saw danger handled with calm. Wolves chased off, strangers challenged, fires stoked brighter, order restored. These memories taught them vigilance without panic, courage without recklessness. One little-known detail from military reports is that some warriors deliberately slept nearest the entrance, placing themselves between family and danger. The flap was both doorway and potential breach, so the strongest often claimed that spot. To outsiders, it looked uncomfortable, with cold drafts creeping in. But for those inside, it was reassurance. The family's first defense was a warrior's body, ready to rise at the faintest threat. The atmosphere of such nights was electric. Imagine hearing dogs growl low, then seeing firelight flare as men seized torches. The sound of shouts, the smell of smoke, the sight of shadows moving swiftly. Then silence again, the camp resettling, sleepers drifting back into dreams. Even in rest, life felt poised on the edge, balanced between warmth and vigilance. Predators were not the only threat. Hunger sometimes drove desperate animals closer, emboldened by the smell of food. Bears, though less common in midwinter, could still appear. People learned to store meat high, or inside lodges near fire, to mask scent. Yet no system was perfect. The tension of knowing danger might scratch at the flap made weapons by the bed a necessity, not decoration. There were human dangers as well. Rivalries between groups sometimes flared, and raids could come in darkness. Smoke holes glowing like stars marked where families slept, vulnerable if unguarded. To counter this, camps placed lodges in rings. Warriors often positioned strategically at edges. Fires kept burning low but steady. Even when eyes closed, strategies held. Safety came not from denial of threat, but from preparation for it. Think of the sensory world when a camp roused. Dogs bark furiously, horses whinny in alarm, voices rise. The cold air slaps your face as you step outside, spear in hand, snow crunching underfoot. Firelight flickers across dozens of lodges, neighbors emerging, everyone alert. You feel the collective strength of the camp, no family left to fend alone. The danger may pass quickly, but the adrenaline lingers, reminding you why vigilance matters. Anthropologists suggest that such experiences shaped identity profoundly. To live always ready, even in dreams, fostered resilience. It taught that comfort was precious but fragile, always balanced against vigilance. Sleep was never mere escape. It was part of survival's rhythm, punctuated by moments of alertness. To dream in such a world was to trust, not blindly but conditionally, knowing that at any moment you might need to rise. One trader admitted he never truly adapted. He envied how calmly families returned to sleep after alarms, while he lay awake, heart racing, unable to drift off again. For him, safety meant certainty. For them, it meant readiness. The difference reveals two worldviews, one seeking permanence, the other embracing fluidity. In the Tipi, survival meant living with uncertainty, not erasing it. Picture yourself settling again after such an alarm. Dogs quiet, men return to their robes, fire steadies. The cold still presses outside, but warmth reclaims the lodge. You close your eyes, weapons still within reach, ears still half-tuned. Yet sleep returns, gentler now, layered with trust in family, dogs, horses, and neighbors. Readiness itself has become comfort. You drift into dreams once more, held not only by furs and fire, but by the confidence that if danger comes again, you will rise to meet it. The night has stretched long, but finally the air shifts. The cold remains sharp, yet something subtle changes. The darkness begins to thin. You blink awake, still cocooned in hides, and notice the faintest ribbon of grey filtering through the flap. Dawn has arrived, and with it, the slow unfolding of morning inside the teepee. Survival was never only about enduring the night. It was also about greeting the day with rituals that steadied spirit and body alike. Accounts from explorers often remark on how mornings in winter camps felt deliberate, never rushed. Fires, banked low through the night, were stirred first. Embers glowed red, coaxed into flame with careful puffs of breath. A woman added kindling, then larger sticks until warmth grew again. The crackle of fire became the village's first voice each day, calling sleepers gently awake. No one leapt into frantic motion. Life resumed with calm. Warmth was restored before anything else. One evocative anecdote comes from a fur trader who described waking in a Dakota camp. He noted the hush of voices as women whispered while feeding fires, the slow rustle of robes as children stirred, and the way light filtered softly through smoke. It was as though the sun entered not only the sky but the lodge itself, he wrote. The detail captures how dawn felt less like a sudden shift and more like a gradual blessing, moving from embers to voices to daylight. Scholars debate whether formal prayers were spoken each morning or whether gratitude was expressed in quieter, habitual ways. Some argue that offerings of food or tobacco into the fire were common, small gestures of thanks for survival through another night. Others suggest the ritual was implicit in action. The simple act of rekindling fire and sharing warmth was itself prayer. Evidence is fragmentary, but all agree mornings carried meaning beyond chores. Imagine the sensory atmosphere as you sit up, robe wrapped tightly around your shoulders. The fire pops as it accepts new fuel, sending sparks upward. Smoke curls lazily through the vent, tinged with the golden edge of dawn. The lodge smells of warmth, returning wood or chips igniting, hides radiating stored heat. Your toes, cold against the mat, begin to thaw as you stretch them toward the flames. Outside, faint sounds of horses stamping and dogs shaking frost from their coats drift in. Children wake slowly, rubbing eyes, hair tousled, voices groggy. Mothers guide them toward the fire, where bowls of warm broth or roasted scraps are offered. A child might sip, sigh, and lean against a parent half asleep still. These small gestures of care were as important as fire or robes. Nourishment in the morning was reassurance, proof that the night's danger had passed and the day could begin with strength. One little-known observation from a missionary notes that families often stepped briefly outside at dawn, faces turned east, to breathe in the cold air. He interpreted it as a ritual greeting to the Sunday. Perhaps he was right, or perhaps it was simply the habit of checking weather, herds, and horizon. Either way, the act carried symbolic weight. To face the sunrise was to acknowledge renewal. After hours of darkness, the world had not ended. Life continued. The psychology of this transition was profound. Nights carried fear, uncertainty, the howl of predators, the threat of freezing. To wake alive, to see light return, was never taken for granted. Gratitude permeated even mundane acts, stirring embers, passing bowls, adjusting robes. Families may not have always spoken thanks aloud, but their movements embodied relief. Every dawn was survival proven again. The tactile rhythm of morning reinforced this. Hides were shaken, folded, or rearranged. Mats were brushed, bedding rolled back to air. Children dressed in fresh layers, fingers fumbling with ties. Men tightened belts, checked weapons, prepared to tend horses. Women portioned food, planned tasks. The lodge shifted from cocoon of sleep to hive of activity, each role fitting into place seamlessly. The same circle that had cradled silence now hummed with motion. Anthropologists suggest these rituals shaped resilience. By greeting each day with routine, families created continuity in a world of constant change. Storms might rage, herds might move, danger might loom, but every dawn began with the same acts. Fire rekindled, food shared, sun greeted. The predictability anchored spirit, making survival not merely endurance but rhythm. A trader once confessed that he envied this rhythm. His own mornings, he admitted, began with chaos, fumbling with matches, cursing at frozen boots, rushing into tasks. In contrast, The Tipi mornings unfolded slowly, methodically, almost serenely. He realized that the calm itself conserved energy, making long days more bearable. The difference was not accident but wisdom, cultivated across generations. Picture yourself now, sitting cross-legged by the fire. The east-facing flap has been lifted, and light spills across the floor, gilding every hide with gold. Smoke drifts upward, glowing in the beam like incense. You sip warm broth, your body easing into wakefulness. Outside, voices rise, laughter begins. Children dash into snow with shrieks. Inside, warmth grows steady. Your robe loosens, your breath slows. You feel gratitude not as an abstract idea, but as sensation. Heat in your chest, light on your face, food in your belly. Even spirituality wove through these mornings. Some traditions describe dawn as a time when the veil between worlds thinned, when spirits were closest. To wake and face the sun was not only to greet the day, but to greet ancestors, animals, and unseen companions. Dreams from the night might be shared now, their messages folded into morning tasks. The lodge became classroom and chapel both, where warmth carried meaning beyond survival. So you finish your broth, roll your bedding, and stretch your limbs. The night's cold still lingers outside, but inside, light and fire have claimed victory. You rise knowing that another night has been endured, another dawn embraced. Survival is not only in hides and fire, but in gratitude, in routine, in the quiet rituals of first light. You close your eyes briefly, inhaling smoke and sunlight, and you feel peace. In that peace lies strength, and in that strength, the promise that tonight, when darkness falls again, you will endure once more. The sun has climbed, the morning bustle has quieted, and daily tasks unfold. Yet even in daylight, the shadow of night lingers. Everyone knows darkness will return, with its cold, its dangers, its relentless hunger for warmth. The success of tomorrow's sleep is decided today. Fuel must be gathered, bedding tended, food prepared, hides checked. Survival was not a matter of one dramatic battle each night, but of countless small, careful acts performed long before the stars appeared. Travelers who lived among winter camps often wrote with astonishment about the discipline of these routines. Women collected fuel relentlessly, wood where possible, buffalo chips when not stacking them carefully against lodges. Men inspected horses, tethered them securely, sometimes bringing them closer when storms threatened. Children fetched water, gathered snow, or carried small bundles of kindling. The camp moved like a machine, each person contributing, each action aimed at one goal, another night of warmth. One curious anecdote comes from a soldier who admitted he underestimated the seriousness of these preparations. He napped by the fire one afternoon, only to be scolded gently by an elder who told him, "You sleep now, you freeze later." The words struck him like a proverb. He later wrote that he never again wasted daylight, realizing that every stick gathered, every robe shaken, every chip stacked, was a promise to tomorrow's body. Scholars still debate whether such routines were rigidly scheduled or more flexible, guided by need. Some argue that strict order governed chores, ensuring no family lagged. Others suggest work flowed organically, each person rising when fuel dwindled or bedding sagged. What is certain is that neglect was costly and diligence was constant. Imagine the sensory rhythm of these chores. Women shake out robes, their heavy folds thudding as they land across poles to air. Children carry dung chips in baskets, the discs knocking together with hollow clacks. Men chop scarce wood with muffled thuds, breath steaming as axes bite frozen bark. The camp hums with labor, the air thick with the smell of smoke, hides, sweat, and snow. Each sound, each scent, is part of a symphony of preparation. Inside lodges, bedding is rotated once more. Mats are lifted, edges brushed free of frost, robes flipped so dampness dries by firelight. Babies are bundled tighter, their cradle boards checked for warmth. Tools are sharpened, weapons cleaned, ropes untangled. The tipi is not static. It is alive with adjustment, each detail fine-tuned to make the coming night smoother than the last. One little-known observation from a trader describes how families sometimes sang softly during these chores, turning monotony into rhythm. He noted that children's laughter blended with women's humming, creating an atmosphere less of drudgery and more of flow. In his words, they worked as if rehearsing for another night's play, their voices rehearsing lines they already knew by heart. The idea lingers, chores themselves became ritual, part of the great cycle of night and day. The psychology of this forward-looking labor was profound. By preparing constantly, people reduced fear. They did not wait for darkness to bring dread. They met it in daylight, with tasks and planning. This rhythm built confidence. When the sun set, no one panicked, because everything was ready. Survival was not a desperate scramble at midnight, but the natural reward of day-long diligence. Anthropologists suggest this mindset shaped cultural identity. Children learned that safety was earned, not granted. They absorbed lessons of foresight, discipline, and care from the moment they could carry a chip or fold a robe. These lessons endured, shaping adults who understood that small acts stacking fuel, mending seams were as heroic as hunting or battle. Picture the atmosphere late in the afternoon. Shadows stretch across snow, the air grows sharper, and the camp begins to shift. Fires are fed more steadily, bedding is unrolled, hides are checked for tears. Women's hands move quickly, smoothing mats, tucking edges. Men bring in fuel, stacking it near the hearth. Children scamper, delivering the last bundles. The entire camp moves toward one shared climax, readiness for nightfall. A trader once confessed he marveled at how the village seemed to inhale as sunset approached. They drew breath together, he wrote, preparing to exhale warmth through another night. His observation may have been poetic exaggeration, but it captures the truth. A tipi camp did not face night passively. It anticipated, prepared, and met it as a collective act. The sensory satisfaction of this readiness was tangible. To see a high stack of fuel, to smell hides warmed from airing, to feel robes freshly shaken, to hear water bubbling in pots these reassured hearts. Each sense confirmed that the coming cold would be held at bay. Families drifted into evening with confidence, knowing tomorrow's survival had already been secured. Even spirituality brushed these routines. Some traditions described preparation itself as sacred duty. To neglect chores was to disrespect the gifts of earth, the wood, the buffalo, the hides. To honor them was to treat survival not as entitlement but as relationship. By tending bedding, stacking fuel, and stirring fire, families honored the cycle that kept them alive. So you sit cross-legged in the lodge as dusk settles, watching the fire flare brighter. Outside, the village hums with last-minute chores, laughter, and voices. Inside, bedding lies smooth, fuel stacked, robes ready. You exhale slowly, feeling the satisfaction of order. The night will be cold, yes, but you are ready. Readiness itself is warmth, as real as fire, as steady as breath. You lie back under your robe, secure in the knowledge that tomorrow morning, when dawn comes again, you will wake alive because of what was done today. Night gathers again, and the village settles into its familiar rhythm. Fires glow, robes are pulled tight, dogs circle and lie down. You feel the cycle repeating, the same preparations, the same warmth, the same vigilance. Yet you also sense that each night is more than repetition. It is continuity, a thread linking generations. To sleep inside a tipi was never just to avoid freezing. It was to affirm belonging, to embody tradition, to carry forward a way of life shaped by land, animals, ancestors, and ingenuity. Historical accounts often remark on this continuity. Explorers who expected disorder instead found order lodges placed deliberately, chores performed daily, sleep guarded by ritual. Outsiders saw tents of hide. Insiders knew they were living systems. The tipi was both fortress and womb, both shelter and symbol. Every night survived was proof that knowledge passed down through centuries still worked. One curious anecdote comes from a missionary who admitted, grudgingly, that he had underestimated the tipi. He believed stone houses superior, yet he found himself coughing in smoke-filled cabins, while families in tipis breathed easier. He saw them sleep through storms that shattered wooden roofs, warm beneath layers of robes while he shivered under blankets. In his journal he wrote, "They have mastered the night in ways we have not." His reluctant respect is telling. Scholars still discuss whether this mastery was born of necessity alone or shaped by spiritual worldview. Some argue that every adaptation, the smoke flaps, the snowbanks, the bedding layers, was practical invention. Others insist spirituality infused it all, that reverence for fire, for snow, for buffalo-guided choices. Likely, both are true. In the tipi, survival and spirit never stood apart. The line between them blurred until warmth itself became sacred. Imagine the sensory totality one last time. You lie on mats layered with robes, furs pressed snug. Smoke drifts upward, carrying faint sparks through the vent. Outside, snow piles against the lodge, muffling the world. Dogs breathe steadily. Horses stamp softly. Neighbors' fires glow like stars. Inside, your body radiates warmth, caught and magnified by clothing, bedding, and hides. The cold cannot reach you. What you feel instead is belonging to your family, your community, your ancestors, the land itself. A trader once confessed that in these lodges he felt something more than safety. It was not only that I was warm, he wrote, but that I was part of something larger. The cold could not touch me, not because of hides alone, but because of the circle. His words, unintentional poetry, capture the truth. To sleep in a tipi was to sleep in a circle of trust, a geometry of survival and spirit combined. The night deepens, and you understand now that survival here was never about one trick alone. It was the union of many. The fire at the center, the snow packed at the base, the robes layered thick, the breath vented upward, the dogs curled near, the vigilance maintained. Each was a thread. Together they wove the fabric of life. That fabric held strong enough to face storms, predators, hunger, and despair, and in holding it created peace enough for dreams. So you close your eyes once more, knowing that the lodge is more than shelter. It is history, culture, science, and faith bound together in poles and hide. It is the warmth of fire and the warmth of kin, the comfort of routine and the comfort of dreams. You sleep not as an isolated body, but as part of a circle that has endured for centuries. And in that circle, the cold is powerless. Now, let the pace soften. Imagine the fire's glow fading into embers, the red light pulsing slowly, like a heartbeat. The sounds of the camp diminish, dogs quiet, voices hush, wind muffles against snowbanks. The tipi settles into silence, its hides breathing gently with the night air. You are safe inside, wrapped in furs that cradle your body, warmed by the coals that still whisper beneath the stones. Outside, the prairie lies vast and still, blanketed in snow that glitters faintly under starlight. The cold is sharp, but it cannot reach you here. The circle of the lodge holds firm, poles rising like guardians, hides curved like an embrace. You are sheltered by knowledge passed down through countless winters, wisdom woven into every detail, fire placed at the heart, robes layered with care, smoke drifting upward into the sky. Breathe slowly. Inhale the faint scent of wood smoke, exhale the weight of worry. Each breath carries you deeper into calm. The rhythm of your body matches the rhythm of the lodge, steady and sure. You are not alone. Around you, others sleep, their breaths joining yours, their warmth part of yours. The entire camp dreams together, bound in one great circle of survival and trust. Now, imagine the stars above, cold and bright, watching over you. Sparks from the fire rise to meet them, fading into the sky like tiny prayers. The night stretches vast, but you remain secure, cocooned in warmth, in history, in belonging. Let your mind drift like smoke, upward and outward, until thought itself dissolves into quiet. Rest now. The storm can rage, the cold can bite, but you are safe. The night holds you gently. Sleep deeply, sleep warmly, sleep in peace.